My neighbor whispered to me over the fence that a man sneaks into my house whenever I go on business trips. I thought he was just a senile old man trying to stir up trouble. But when I installed a hidden camera and pretended to leave town, what I saw on the screen at exactly 11 p.m. made my blood freeze in my veins. It was not a thief. It was not a lover. It was something far more sinister involving the people I trusted most in this world. I am Elijah Vance, 73 years old, a retired Boeing engineer, and I was about to learn that the biggest structural failure in my life was not in the machines I built, but in the family I raised. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives piece by piece with the precision of a mechanic, let me know in the comments if you have ever discovered a betrayal that happened right under your nose. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy stories where justice is served cold. It started on a Tuesday afternoon, typical of Seattle weather, gray and drizzling. I was mowing the lawn, pushing the machine with the same steady rhythm I had used for 40 years. My neighbor George Henderson waved at me from his porch. George is 80 and spends most of his days watching the street from behind his curtains. Usually I just wave back and keep working, but today he walked right up to the property line, ignoring the rain soaking his cardigan. I turned off the mower. The sudden silence was heavy. George looked nervous. He kept glancing at my front door as if he expected someone to burst out. He leaned in close and said, "Elijah, I need to tell you something that has been eating me up inside. Whenever you pack that blue suitcase and drive off for your fishing trips or conferences, a car pulls into your back alley. A man in a dark coat gets out. He goes into your house through the garage side door, and he does not leave until 4 a.m. I laughed at first. It was a dry, humorless laugh. I told George that was impossible. My wife Beatrice is 70. She has early onset dementia. She is not hosting secret parties. And my son-in-law Brad stays over to watch her whenever I am away. Brad is a respectable financial director. He is family. George just shook his head sadly and said, "I know what I saw, Elijah. It happens every single time, always at 11 p.m. Just watch out for yourself." He turned and walked back into his house, leaving me standing there with the rain dripping off the brim of my cap. I wanted to be angry at George. I wanted to dismiss him as a busybody. But the engineer in me could not ignore a piece of data just because I did not like it. In my line of work, you check the rivets even if you are sure they are tight. I went inside. The house was quiet. Beatrice was napping in her chair. Brad was at work. I started walking through my own home like it was a crime scene. I looked for anomalies, things out of place. I went to the garage. It was clean. Brad parked his Tesla there when he visited. I sniffed the air. Underneath the smell of oil and old cardboard, there was something else. A faint, acrid scent. Stale tobacco. Nobody in our family smoked. Brad was a fitness fanatic who lectured me if I ate too much red meat. I looked at the floor near the side door. There was a tiny scuff mark, black rubber against the gray concrete, as if someone had pivoted sharply in heavy boots. My slippers did not make marks like that. Brad wore expensive Italian leather loafers that did not scuff. Then I went to the living room. My favorite leather armchair, the one I had sat in for 20 years, felt wrong. I sat down. The angle was off. I got up and measured the distance from the chair leg to the rug. It was moved 2 inches to the left. It seems like a small detail to anyone else, but I am a man who notices if a picture frame is tilted 1 degree. Someone had moved this chair to create more space in the center of the room. Why would they need space in the middle of the night? The seed of doubt George planted had now sprouted into a thorny vine choking my chest. I needed proof. I went down to my basement workshop. This was my sanctuary. I had drawers full of components, wires, and tools from my days at the plant. I found an old, high-resolution inspection camera, the kind we used to check for hairline cracks in turbine blades. It was small, smaller than a dime. I went upstairs and took the vintage teddy bear that sat on the mantelpiece. It was an antique Beatrice loved. I carefully removed the left glass eye and replaced it with the camera lens. I wired a battery pack inside the stuffing and set it to transmit to a secure cloud server that I could access from my tablet. I placed the bear back on the mantel facing the center of the room. It looked innocent, just a toy watching over a quiet house. That evening at dinner, I made my move. I told Brad and my daughter Nia that the old crew from the hangar was planning a last-minute fishing trip up to Lake Washington. I said I would be leaving tomorrow afternoon and staying away for 2 nights. I watched Brad carefully. He did not look annoyed that he would have to babysit Beatrice. In fact, his eyes lit up. He smiled that perfect white-toothed smile that always seemed a little too practiced. He said, "That is great, Dad. You deserve a break. Do not worry about Mom. I will come over straight after work and stay in the guest room. I will take good care of everything." Nia kissed my cheek and said, "Have fun, Dad." She had no idea. She looked at her husband with total adoration. It broke my heart to think that she might be sleeping next to a monster, but I had to know the truth. The next afternoon, I packed my bag. I made a show of loading the fishing gear into my truck. I hugged Beatrice, who looked at me with those confused, foggy eyes and asked if I was going to work. I told her I would be back soon. Brad was already there, sitting on the sofa, typing on his laptop. He waved casually as I walked out the door. I drove 3 blocks down, turned the corner, and parked in an empty lot behind the old community center. I reclined the seat and waited. The rain drummed against the roof of my truck. The hours ticked by slowly. 7 p.m., 8 p.m. I ate a cold sandwich I had packed. Night fell and the streetlights flickered on. My tablet sat on the dashboard, glowing in the dark. The feed from the teddy bear showed the living room. I saw Brad feed Beatrice dinner. I saw him give her the evening pills. Then at 9 p.m., I saw him guide her to her bedroom. He came back out, turned off the main lights, and sat on the sofa. He did not turn on the TV. He did not read. He just sat there in the dark, checking his watch every 30 seconds. His body language was tense, coiled like a spring. This was not a man relaxing. This was a man waiting. 10:55 p.m. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt like I was back on the test flight deck during a storm. 11 o'clock p.m. On the screen, the door from the garage opened. A slice of light cut across the dark living room. Brad stood up immediately. He did not look surprised. He walked toward the door. A man stepped in. He was wearing a dark raincoat and a baseball cap pulled low. He was carrying a heavy metal briefcase. I leaned closer to the tablet, squinting. Who was this, a drug dealer? A fence for stolen goods? Brad did not shake the man's hand. He just nodded and pointed to the dining table. The man walked over and placed the briefcase down. He opened it. Even in the low light of the night vision camera, I could see what was inside. It was not drugs, it was machinery. The man took out a compact 3D printer and a laptop. Then he pulled out a stack of documents with thick blue covers. Legal documents. Brad turned on a small desk lamp. The light cast long shadows on their faces. I turned up the volume on my tablet. The audio was crisp. The stranger spoke first. His voice was gravelly. He said, "Are you sure the old man is gone for the night?" Brad laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound I had never heard before. He said, "Yeah. He is probably halfway to the lake by now, thinking about trout. The old fool does not suspect a thing. Beatrice is out cold. I doubled her dose. She would not wake up if we set the house on fire." My grip on the tablet was so tight I thought the screen would crack. Doubled her dose. He was drugging my wife. My Beatrice. The stranger nodded and pulled out a sheet of paper. He said, "Okay. I have the calibration set for his signature. The loop on the J is tricky, but I think I got it. Do you have the deed to the house?" Brad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a document. I recognized the red stamp immediately. It was the deed to my home, the home I had paid for with 40 years of sweat. "Here it is," Brad said. "Just make sure the transfer of power of attorney looks legitimate. I have investors coming on Friday. I need this house in my name by then or the deal falls through." I sat there in the dark cabin of my truck, trembling with a rage so pure and hot it felt like I had swallowed a live coal. They were not just stealing, they were erasing me. They were declaring me incompetent, drugging my wife, and selling the ground beneath our feet. Brad was going to take everything. I reached for the door handle to run back there and tear them apart with my bare hands. But I stopped. I forced my hand to let go. I took a deep breath. I am an engineer. You do not fix a catastrophic failure by hitting it with a hammer. You analyze the system, you find the weak point, and you dismantle it. I watched them for a moment longer. Brad poured himself a glass of my vintage whiskey, celebrating his victory. "Enjoy the drink, son," I whispered to the empty car, "because it is going to be the last thing you enjoy for a very long time." I started the engine and drove away, not to the lake, but to prepare for war. The rain continued to hammer against the roof of my truck, creating a rhythmic drumbeat that usually calmed me down, but tonight it sounded like nails being driven into a coffin. Inside the cab, the only light came from the tablet screen resting on my dashboard. I watched in silence as my living room was transformed into a criminal workshop. Through the lens of the teddy bear, I saw the man in the dark coat unzip the heavy metal case. He did not rush. His movements were precise and practiced like a surgeon preparing for an operation. He lifted out a machine that looked like a black cube about the size of a toaster, but I recognized it immediately. It was a portable polymer printer, the kind used to forge government-grade identification cards and official seals. Next to it, he placed a high-resolution optical scanner and a laptop with a military-grade encryption dongle plugged into the side. This was not some amateur thug breaking in to steal a television. This was a professional who cost thousands of dollars an hour. I watched as he took the original deed to my house, the one Brad had stolen from my safe, and placed it under the scanner. A blue light swept across the paper, digitizing 40 years of my hard work in seconds. Then the stranger picked up a stylus and began working on the laptop screen. I zoomed in on the video feed. He was isolating my signature from an old tax document. On the screen, I saw my own name, Elijah Vance, blown up to the size of a billboard, the loop of the E, the sharp angle of the V. He was analyzing the pressure points of my handwriting. The 3D printer whirred to life, emitting a low, high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. It was not printing plastic. It was carving a rubber stamp, a perfect replica of my signature. The man picked up the fresh stamp and pressed it onto a scrap piece of paper. He examined it with a jeweler loupe, then shook his head. Too much ink on the downstroke, he muttered. His voice was tinny through the tablet speakers, but clear enough. He adjusted the calibration on the stamp and tried again. This time he nodded. Perfect. He held it up to the light. It was sickening to watch. It was my hand, my identity being manufactured by a stranger while my son-in-law stood by and watched with a glass of my wine in his hand. They were not just forging a document. They were stealing my voice. They were making it so that I could scream as loud as I wanted, but the law would only see that stamp and say that I had agreed to my own destruction. Brad walked over to the table and leaned in. His face was flushed with alcohol and excitement. "So is it done?" he asked. "Can I file this tomorrow?" The forger did not look up. He was busy printing the main document now. A power of attorney form. The text was dense and legalistic, but the header was unmistakable. It granted Bradley Miller full unrestricted control over the assets and medical decisions of Elijah and Beatrice Vance due to permanent cognitive incapacitation. The forger peeled the document off the printer tray. "It is done," he said. "But remember, this paper is only as good as your story. If the old man fights back and gets a lawyer to challenge this, the stamp might not hold up under forensic analysis. You need to make sure he is in no position to fight." Brad laughed again and took a long sip of the wine. "Do not worry about Elijah," he said. "He thinks he is a genius because he fixed airplanes for 30 years, but he is just a simple man from a different time. He got lucky with this land value. He does not understand how modern finance works." I listened as Brad began to pace around the room, gesturing with the wine glass. "I owe the venture capital fund $2 million by Friday," Brad said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I made a bad bet on that crypto startup, and the partners are breathing down my neck. If I do not show them collateral, they are going to liquidate me. This house is the only thing that can save my skin. It is $5 million of prime Seattle real estate sitting under the feet of two people who do not even know what to do with it." The forger packed up his scanner. "And the daughter?" he asked. "What about your wife?" Brad waved his hand dismissively. "Naya is weak," he said. "She does whatever I tell her. I told her her parents are failing. I told her they are a danger to themselves. She cried a bit, but she signed the admission papers for the nursing home this morning. She thinks she is saving them. God, she is so naive. Sometimes I look at her and her family and I wonder how they even managed to keep this house for so long without ruining it. It must be blind luck, because it certainly is not intelligence. You know how these people are. They hold on to things they do not deserve." The slur hung in the air. He did not use the worst word, but he used all the others. These people. Unintelligent. Undeserving. He was standing in the house I built, eating the food I bought, drinking the wine I saved, talking about my daughter as if she were a pet he had trained. My vision blurred. A red haze washed over the tablet screen. I felt a roar building in my throat, a primal sound of rage that wanted to tear the world apart. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. I wanted to start the truck right now. I wanted to drive down the block, crash through the garage door, and beat him until he could never speak again. I imagined the feel of my fist connecting with his jaw. I imagined dragging him out onto the wet pavement and showing the neighborhood exactly what kind of coward was hiding behind those expensive suits. I reached for the key in the ignition. My hand was shaking uncontrollably. I was a Marine before I was an engineer. I knew how to hurt people. I knew how to end threats. It would be so easy. Just 2 minutes, and it would be over. But then I looked at the screen again. I saw the legal papers on the table. If I went in there now and attacked him, I would be the angry, violent black man attacking his white son-in-law. He would have the bruises. He would have the victim story. And he would still have the papers. The police would come, and he would show them the power of attorney. He would say I had a dementia episode. He would say I was dangerous. And I would end up in a cell or a straitjacket while he sold my house from under me. Violence was a trap. He was baiting me into losing control. If I lost my temper, I lost everything. I took a deep breath, forcing the air into my lungs, holding it until my chest burned. I let it out slowly. I closed my eyes and pictured the complex hydraulic systems I used to design. Pressure needs a release valve or the pipe bursts. I needed to be the valve. I opened my eyes. The rage was still there, but it was cold now. It was a block of ice sitting in my stomach. I watched as the forger packed up his gear and Brad handed him a thick envelope of cash. They shook hands. Brad looked triumphant. He thought he had won. He thought the game was over. I turned off the tablet. I sat in the darkness listening to the rain. I am not going to beat you with my fists, Brad, I whispered. I am going to beat you with the one thing you think I do not have. My mind. You want a senile old man. You want a helpless victim. Fine. I will be the best actor you have ever seen. I will give you exactly what you want until you are so confident, so arrogant that you walk right into the grave you dug for yourself. I started the engine. I was not going back to the lake. I was going back to the house. But Elijah Vance, the engineer, was not walking through that door. The man walking through that door would be the confused, stumbling old fool Brad expected. I would let him think he was the puppet master. I would let him pull the strings, but he would never realize that I was the one building the stage, and when the trapdoor opened, he would be the only one falling. I put the truck in gear and drove slowly back toward the house, ready to play the role of a lifetime. I pulled my truck into the driveway on Sunday afternoon, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. I had spent the last 2 days sitting in a parking lot eating cold sandwiches and watching my family betray me on a tablet screen. But now I had to walk through that front door and play the role of the oblivious husband. I grabbed the cooler from the back seat, which I had filled with store-bought trout just to sell the lie that I had been fishing. I took a deep breath. "Showtime, Elijah," I whispered to myself. "You are not an engineer today. You are just a tired old man." When I walked inside, the house smelled of roast chicken and lemon polish. It was a sickeningly domestic scent considering the crimes being committed under this roof. Nia came running out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked tired. Her eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been crying, but when she saw me, she forced a bright smile. "Welcome back, Dad," she said, hugging me tightly. I hugged her back, feeling a wave of pity. She had no idea she was living with a monster. Brad was sitting on the sofa, his legs crossed, his eyes glued to the television. He stood up when he saw me, his movements smooth and predatory. "Hey, Elijah, catch anything?" he asked. I held up the cooler. "A few small ones," I said, keeping my voice gravelly. "How is your mother?" Brad sighed and shook his head. "Not good, Elijah. Not good at all. She has been very confused these past 2 days. She kept wandering around looking for her keys. We had to lock the doors." I walked past him into the dining room where Beatrice was sitting. My heart stopped. Just 3 days ago, she had been alert enough to do the crossword puzzle. Now she was slumped in her chair, staring blankly at a spot on the wall. Her skin was gray and waxy. Her hands, the hands that had planted our rose garden and held our children, were trembling violently on the tablecloth. "Beatrice," I said softly, kneeling beside her. "Honey, I am back. She turned her head slowly like a rusted machine. Her eyes were glazed over. She looked at me for a long time, blinking. Then she said something that tore my soul in half. "Who are you? Are you the doctor?" I felt tears prick my eyes. No, honey. It is me, Eli. Brad stepped up behind me, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. See what I mean, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. It is heartbreaking, Dad. The decline is accelerating just like the specialist said it would. I wanted to stand up and break his nose. I wanted to scream that there was no specialist, only a poisoner standing in my dining room, but I swallowed the rage. It tasted bitter like bile. I patted Beatrice's hand. It is okay, I said. I am here now. Dinner was an exercise in torture. I sat there chewing dry chicken while Brad talked about the stock market and Nia cut up her mother as food because Beatrice could no longer hold a knife. Every time I looked at my wife, I saw a woman fading away. They were not just killing her body, they were erasing her mind. After the plates were cleared, Nia went to the kitchen and returned with a small silver tray. On it was a glass of water and a single pill. It was a vivid, dark blue capsule. I had never seen a vitamin that looked like that. Time for your medicine, Mom, Nia said gently. Brad stopped clearing the table. He stood by the sideboard watching. His eyes were not on the television anymore. They were locked on that pill. He was like a hawk watching a mouse. He needed to make sure the poison went down. What is that one again? I asked, casually leaning back in my chair. It is the new supplement from Germany, Dad, Nia explained. The one Brad found. It helps with neural pathways. Can I see it? I asked, reaching out. Brad took a step forward. Dad, Mom really needs to take it now. She is agitated. I ignored him and picked up the pill. I held it up to the light. It was small and sleek. I had a split-second plan. In my pocket, I had a yellow fish oil capsule. It was roughly the same size, but the color was wrong. I needed a distraction. I needed chaos. I tried to hand the pill back to Nia, but I let my hand spasm. I jerked my arm and the blue pill flew out of my fingers. It hit the edge of the table and bounced onto the floor, rolling under the heavy oak sideboard. Oh, for heaven's sake, I muttered, pushing my chair back. My clumsy old hands. I will get it, Nia said. No, I dropped it. I will get it, I said quickly. I dropped to my knees before anyone could stop me. I crawled under the lip of the sideboard. It was dark down there. I saw the blue pill lying near the baseboard. I reached into my pocket and palmed the yellow fish oil pill. Then in one fluid motion, I grabbed the blue pill with my left hand and shoved it into my sock. With my right hand, I pretended to search, then flicked the yellow pill out onto the carpet where the light hit it. Found it, I wheezed, crawling back out. It looks a little different, Brad said, squinting at the yellow pill on the carpet. It is just the dust, I said, wiping it on my shirt, or maybe the light down there. Here, Nia, wash it off. Nia took the yellow pill. Because she trusted me, and because the dining room light was dim, she did not question it. She gave it to Beatrice with a glass of water. Beatrice swallowed it. I looked at Brad. He was frowning slightly, but he did not say anything. He could not admit he knew exactly what the pill looked like without admitting he knew exactly what was in it. He let it go. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. Safe. For tonight, she was safe. The next morning, I told Nia I had a toothache and needed to see the dentist. I drove straight to the University of Washington. My old friend Alistair was the head of the biochemistry department. We had gone to school together 40 years ago. He was the only man I trusted with this. I walked into his lab, my hands shaking not from age, but from adrenaline. Alistair looked up from a microscope. Eli, he said, smiling. To what do I owe the pleasure? I pulled the blue pill out of a tissue in my pocket. I need you to run a full spectral analysis on this, I said. Right now. Do not ask me where I got it. Alistair saw the look on my face. The smile vanished. He took the pill and walked over to the mass spectrometer. Give me 20 minutes, he said. Those 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I paced the hallway, looking at the posters of molecules and atoms, thinking about how fragile life is. It is all just chemistry. Love, memory, personality. It is all just chemical reactions. And Brad was tampering with the chemistry of the woman I loved. When Alistair came out, he was holding a printout. His face was pale. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Eli, he said, his voice low. This is not a supplement. Tell me, I said, leaning against the wall for support. It is a cocktail, Alistair said, pointing to the jagged peaks on the graph. The base is haloperidol, an antipsychotic used for severe schizophrenia, but it is mixed with a sedative that has been banned in the U.S. for 10 years. It is called diazepam 4. What does it do, I asked. Alistair looked grim. If you give this to a healthy person, especially an elderly person, it shuts down the dopamine receptors in the frontal lobe. It causes tremors, confusion, memory loss, and hallucinations. Basically, Eli, it mimics the end stages of Alzheimer's disease, but it is toxic. If she keeps taking this, her kidneys will fail within a month, or she will just go to sleep one night and never wake up. I felt the ground sway beneath my feet. It was not just greed, it was not just theft. It was murder. Slow, cold, calculated murder. Brad was looking into my eyes every morning, smiling, calling me Dad while he slowly killed my wife. Is the damage reversible? I asked, my voice cracking. If she stops now, yes, Alistair said. Most of the cognitive function should return in a few weeks as the toxins leave her system. But Eli, you need to go to the police. This is attempted homicide. I took the printout and folded it carefully, placing it in my inside jacket pocket next to my heart. No police, Alistair. Not yet. Why not? Alistair asked, shocked. Because if I go to the police now, Brad will blame Nia. He will say she gave the pills. He will say she mixed up the medication. He has set it up so perfectly that my daughter is the one holding the weapon. I need to catch him holding the gun. I walked out of the university into the blinding daylight. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was going back to that house. I was going to drink coffee with the man trying to kill my wife. I was going to smile at him. I was going to let him think he was winning. And then when he least expected it, I was going to destroy him. I got into my truck and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The old Eli was gone. The kind grandfather was gone. Staring back at me was a man who had nothing left to lose. I started the engine. The engine roared to life, a beast waking up from a long slumber. I am coming for you, Brad, I whispered. And I am bringing hell with me. They say the hardest part of being a spy is not the danger involved, but the acting. It is the suppression of your true self. For the next few days, I had to kill Elijah Vance, the engineer, the man who could spot a structural flaw in a turbine engine from 50 yards away. In his place, I had to birth a new character, a shuffling, confused old man who could barely hold a spoon without shaking. It was the most humiliating role of my life, but I played it with the dedication of a man fighting for his existence. Wednesday morning began with a performance that would have won me an Academy Award if my audience had not been a viper and his victim. I walked into the kitchen, dragging my feet on the hardwood floor, making sure my slippers scuffed loudly. Brad was already there, dressed in a sharp navy suit, drinking espresso from my favorite mug. He looked like the master of the manor. Nia was at the stove making oatmeal. Her posture was slumped. She looked exhausted from the stress of caring for two parents she believed were rapidly fading. "Good morning, Dad," Nia said, trying to sound cheerful. I stared at her blankly for a moment, letting my mouth hang open slightly before blinking as if I had just realized she was there. "Oh, hello. Is breakfast ready? I am hungry." I sat down at the table, my movements stiff and jerky. Brad watched me over the rim of his cup. His eyes were cold, calculating. He was looking for signs that the drugs were working. I decided to give him exactly what he wanted. When Nia placed a cup of hot coffee in front of me, I reached for it with a trembling hand. I grabbed the handle but let my fingers spasm. The cup tipped. Hot brown liquid splashed all over the pristine white tablecloth and onto the floor. "Oh no," I cried out, shrinking back into my chair like a frightened child. "Look what I did. I am sorry. I am so sorry." Nia rushed over with a towel. "It is okay, Dad. It is just coffee. Do not worry." Brad sighed. It was a loud, theatrical sigh meant to convey the burden of living with an invalid. "Be careful, Elijah. That is Italian linen." I looked up at him, my eyes wide and watery. I squinted as if trying to recognize a stranger. "I am sorry. Buster, I did not mean to make a mess. Good boy, Buster." The room went silent. Nia froze mid-wipe. Brad set his cup down slowly. The ceramic made a sharp click against the saucer. Buster, Nia whispered. "Dad, Buster was our golden retriever. He died 15 years ago. This is Brad, your son-in-law." I looked from Nia to Brad and back again, feigning confusion. "Brad." "Oh, yes, Brad. I thought he has the same eyes. Hungry eyes, just like Buster when I was cutting meat." It was a subtle dig, a knife wrapped in velvet. Buster was a greedy dog who would steal food right off your plate if you looked away. Calling Brad by the dog his name was my way of telling him I saw his nature, but to him, it was just proof that my brain was turning to mush. Brad did not get angry. Instead, a slow smirk spread across his face. He leaned back in his chair looking satisfied. The old man is gone, he must have thought. The drugs are melting his memories. He patted my hand patronizingly. It is okay, Dad. Eat your oatmeal. We have a big day ahead. Later that afternoon, I was sitting in the library pretending to read a book I was actually holding upside down. I heard footsteps approaching. It was Brad. He closed the door behind him and locked it. My senses went on high alert. This was it, the interrogation. He sat in the chair opposite me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. He smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. Dad, he said, his voice dropped dead serious. We need to talk about the safe. The safe, I blinked rapidly. Safe? What safe? The wall safe in the master bedroom, Brad said impatiently. The one behind the painting. Nia says you keep the important documents there. The insurance policies. The bonds. We need to check them, Dad, just to make sure everything is in order for your medical care. I knew exactly what was in that safe. There were bonds worth $200,000 and the emergency cash stash. But more importantly, that was where I kept the spare key to the safety deposit box at the bank, the one Brad did not know about yet. I furrowed my brow, acting as if I was trying to solve a complex calculus equation. The code, I whispered. It is Beatrice's birthday. Brad took out his phone, ready to take notes. Okay, what is the date, Dad? Tell me the date. It is June. No. July. July 4th, 1950. Brad frowned. Dad, Mom was born in August, don't you remember? I started to panic, hyperventilating slightly. No, it is July. I know it is July. Or maybe it is the day we got married. September 12th. Try that. I gave him a sequence of numbers. September 12th, 75. It was indeed our wedding anniversary, but it was not the code to the safe. The real code was the date I graduated from engineering school. But I knew Brad would try the anniversary, and when it opened, because I had reprogrammed it last night to open with that code, he would find the safe empty. I had moved everything to the basement vents 2 hours ago. Brad stood up. Okay, Dad, I will try that. You just relax. He left the room in a hurry. 10 minutes later, I heard a curse shout from upstairs. He had opened the safe and found nothing but dust. He came storming back down, but stopped at the door. He could not yell at me. He could not demand to know where the money was without admitting he was looting my assets. He had to swallow his greed. I watched him from the corner of my eye, pacing the hallway, his face red with frustration. He thought I had lost the things or moved them in a fit of dementia. He never suspected I was hiding them from him. That evening was the final test. Brad had invited a few friends over. He called it a small get-together, but I knew what it was. It was a victory lap. He had invited 2 potential investors for his failing startup. He wanted to show off the house, show off his lifestyle, and prove that he was the patriarch now. I was dressed in a cardigan that was buttoned wrong, a deliberate touch, and seated in the corner of the living room like a piece of furniture. The guests arrived, men in suits, women in cocktail dresses. They drank my wine and ate canapés on my rug. Brad was in his element. He held court in the center of the room, gesturing grandly. This place has so much potential, he told a short, balding man. We are thinking of tearing down the east wall to open up the view, put in a modern glass deck. I gripped the armrest of my chair. Tear down the wall. I had built that wall by hand. I had laid every brick with my father. And what about your in-laws? The man asked, glancing at me. Brad lowered his voice, but he made sure it was loud enough for the room to hear. A tragic situation, really. You can see poor Elijah over there. The lights are on, but nobody is home. The guest looked at me with pity. I let my head loll to one side, staring at a lamp. He is a burden. Honestly, Brad continued, sighing. A heavy burden. But what can you do? Family is family. We are just waiting for the paperwork to clear so we can move them to a facility where they can get professional help. It is for their own good. He does not even know where he is half the time. He thinks I am his dog. Laughter, cruel, polite laughter rippled through the room. It is better this way, a woman said. He looks happy enough, just living in his own little world, My hand inside my cardigan pocket tightened around the small digital recorder. I had taped it to the inside lining. Every word, every insult, every declaration of intent to sell my home and institutionalize me. It was all being captured in high-definition audio. Brad walked over to me with the investors. He wanted to demonstrate his control. He wanted to show them that the lion had no teeth. "Hey, Dad," Brad said loudly as if speaking to the deaf. "We are just talking about the renovations. You do not mind if we change the wallpaper, do you?" I looked up at him. I looked into the eyes of the man who was poisoning my wife and mocking my life. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to shout that I was smarter than all of them combined. I wanted to tell them that this man was a fraud and a criminal. But I forced the bile down. I forced the engineer to stay locked in the basement of my mind. The actor took the stage. I like the blue paper," I mumbled, drooling slightly. "Beatrice likes the blue." Brad turned to his guests and shrugged. "See? Total regression. He is talking about a room that hasn't been blue for 20 years. He patted my shoulder one last time. "Do not worry, Dad. We will take care of everything. You just rest." He walked away, leading his guests to the patio to admire the view that he thought was his. I sat there alone in the corner. The recorder was warm in my pocket. I wiped the fake drool from my chin. My eyes cleared for a split second, sharpening with a terrifying intensity. "Laugh while you can, son," I thought. "You think you have tamed the beast. You think you have put the old dog down. But you just handed me the weapon that is going to end you. You think you are in control. But you are just a character in a script I am writing. And in my script, the villain does not get a glass deck. He gets a concrete cell." I closed my eyes and let the mask slip back into place. The curtain was coming down on Act 1. Act 2 was about to begin, and it was going to be a bloodbath. Thursday morning provided the perfect cover for my escape. I told Brad that I had a follow-up appointment with the urologist at the downtown clinic. It was the kind of embarrassing old man medical issue that I knew he would not want to discuss or attend. He simply waved his hand without looking up from his phone and told me to take an Uber because he was too busy preparing for his big meeting. I shuffled out of the house, leaning heavily on my cane until the door clicked shut behind me. The moment I was out of sight of the security cameras, my posture straightened. The cane became an accessory rather than a crutch. I walked 2 blocks to the public library where I had arranged for a private car service. I was not going to the doctor. I was going to war. My destination was a glass tower in the financial district. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor, where the law firm of Vance & Associates occupied the entire level. Robert Vance was no relation of mine, but we shared a last name and a history. I had helped him with a structural engineering permit for his first office 20 years ago when he was just starting out. Now he was the shark other sharks feared. I walked past the receptionist who looked at my worn cardigan with skepticism until Robert himself burst out of his office. He was a tall man with a suit that cost more than my first car. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm and real. We went into his corner office and I laid everything out on his mahogany desk. The photos from the hidden camera, the audio recordings of Brad mocking me, the chemical analysis of the poison pills. Robert listened in silence. His face remained impassive, but I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. When I finished, he picked up the photo of the forged power of attorney. "This is not just fraud, Elijah," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is a conspiracy to commit elder abuse, attempted murder, and grand larceny. We can have him arrested within the hour." I shook my head. "No, Robert. Arresting him is too easy. If we arrest him now, he will claim he was trying to help us manage our finances. He will claim the drugs were a mistake. He will get a good lawyer and plea bargain down to a misdemeanor. He will be out in 6 months and he will come after Nia. I do not want him stopped. I want him buried." Robert leaned back and tented his fingers. "What do you have in mind?" "I want federal charges," I said. "I want him to go to prison for so long that he forgets what the sun looks like. I know he is planning to use this fake power of attorney to take out a massive loan against my house. He is meeting with lenders tomorrow night. I want to let him do it." Robert raised an eyebrow. "You want to let him leverage your home? That is risky, Elijah." "It is only risky if the house belongs to me," I said, allowing a small cold smile to touch my lips. "But what if by the time he signs those papers, the house belongs to someone else?" Robert stared at me for a moment, then he started to laugh. It was a dry, appreciative sound. You want to transfer the title into an irrevocable trust before he signs? Exactly, I said. We create the Vance Family Trust today. We backdate the intent to transfer based on paperwork I started years ago but never finalized. You push it through the system immediately. By tomorrow evening, legally speaking, Elijah and Beatrice Vance will own nothing. The trust will own the property. So when Brad signs that loan application claiming to represent me, he will be pledging collateral that I do not even personally own anymore. Robert nodded, catching on fast. And since the loan amount is over $1 million and involves federally insured banking institutions that constitutes bank fraud, and since he is using a forged signature across state lines to facilitate it, we are looking at wire fraud and identity theft. We are talking about 30 years in federal prison, mandatory minimums. Draw it up, Robert, I said. I want the trust to be untouchable. And I want one more thing. I want the beneficiary of the trust to be Nia, but only upon the condition that she is not married to Bradley Miller. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the most lethal legal document I had ever seen. It was a cage made of paper and ink. As I signed the final page, transferring my life as work into the safety of the trust, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The house was safe. Now I just needed to understand who exactly Brad was selling us out to. I left the law firm and took a taxi to the industrial side of the city near the docks. This was familiar territory for an engineer, but I was not here for machines. I was here to meet Silas. Silas was a private investigator who used to do background checks for the aviation industry. He was a man who could find a needle in a haystack and tell you who made the needle. We met in a diner that smelled of grease and old coffee. Silas slid a manila envelope across the table. "You are not going to like this, Eli," he said, his eyes looking tired. "Your son-in-law is not just a bad businessman. He is a desperate one, and he borrowed money from the wrong people." I opened the envelope. The photos showed Brad arguing with a man outside a nightclub. The man was thick-set with tattoos climbing up his neck. "Who is he?" I asked. "His name is Nikolai Volkov," Silas whispered. "The press calls them venture capitalists, but the FBI calls them the Solontsevskaya Bratva, the Russian mob. Brad started gambling on cryptocurrency about a year ago. He lost big. He borrowed from legitimate banks first, then when they cut him off, he went to the loan sharks. He owes Volkov $2 million plus interest. And the interest is not calculated in percentages. It is calculated in broken bones." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty diner. My daughter was sleeping in the same bed as a man who owed millions to the Russian mafia. They gave him a deadline. Silas continued. "This Friday. That is why he is pushing so hard for the house. He needs to pay them off, or they are going to kill him. And Eli, these guys do not just kill the debtor. They send a message. They might come for your daughter. They might come for you." I looked at the picture of Volkov. He looked like a shark in a human suit. "Does the FBI know about this?" "They have a file on Volkov a mile long, but they can never pin anything on him," Silas said. "He is careful. He launders his money through real estate loans." I closed the envelope. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. This changed everything. It was no longer just a family dispute. It was a life or death situation. If Brad failed to get the money, the mob would come for us. If he got the money, he would steal my home. I have to let him think he succeeded, I said to myself. I have to let him sign that loan. It is the only way to get the FBI involved. If we catch Volkov as men accepting the fraudulent loan documents, we can get them for money laundering and racketeering. I paid Silas and thanked him. I stepped out into the gray afternoon. I felt like a general surveying the battlefield. I had the legal traps set with Robert. I had the intelligence from Silas. Now I had to go back to the bunker. I returned home just before dinner. Brad was pacing the living room, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked sweaty and pale. When he saw me, he hung up abruptly. "How was the doctor?" he asked, his voice tight. I shuffled in, pretending to be exhausted. "Oh, you know, probing and poking. I just want to sleep." Brad looked at me with a mixture of contempt and desperation. "Listen, Dad, tomorrow night I have some colleagues coming over. Important business partners. I need you and Mom to be scarce. Maybe you can go to the bedroom early." I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. He was terrified of Volkov. He was terrified of losing his life. But instead of coming to me, instead of asking for help, he chose to sacrifice me. He chose to throw his wife, his parents to the wolves to save his own skin. "Of course, son," I wheezed. "We will stay out of your way. We do not want to be a bother." Brad let out a sigh of relief. "Thanks, Dad. It is going to be a big night. It is going to change everything for us." He had no idea how right he was. That night, I lay in bed next to Beatrice, listening to her shallow breathing. I held her hand. Tomorrow night, the house would be filled with monsters, Russian mobsters, a corrupt son-in-law. But they did not know that the house itself was a weapon now. I had transferred the assets. The paperwork was filed electronically by Robert an hour ago. Technically, Brad was about to sell a house that did not belong to me anymore. He was about to sell a ghost. And I had one more preparation to make. I slipped out of bed and went to the basement. I accessed the smart home hub. I had installed this system myself. It controlled the lights, the locks, the shutters, and the security cameras. I pulled up the code on my laptop. I set a new protocol. I called it the mousetrap. I programmed the heavy security shutters to descend on all windows and doors at exactly the moment the digital signature on the loan document was verified. Once they signed, they would be sealed inside with me. I looked at the screen one last time. The trap was set. The bait was laid. Tomorrow night, Elijah Vance, the engineer, would retire, and Elijah Vance, the executioner, would take the stage. I closed the laptop and went back to sleep, enjoying the calm before the storm. Here is part 6 of the script, written in a continuous audio-friendly format designed for AI voice narration. Friday morning arrived with a suffocating tension that filled every corner of the house. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained a bruised purple color that warned of a coming storm. I was sitting in the kitchen staring at my black coffee when Brad walked in carrying a small, sleek box. He looked energized. It was the frantic, manic energy of a gambler who is about to go all in. He placed the box on the table between us and smiled. It was a predator smile showing too many teeth. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice loud and overly cheerful. "I picked up something great for the house today. It is a new security interface. With your memory issues getting worse, I thought we should install a biometric lock system. No more keys to lose, no more codes to forget. You just press your finger here and the door opens. Simple, right?" He opened the box and took out a small black device. It was a glossy disc about the size of a hockey puck with a scanning sensor in the center. He held it up like it was a toy, but my eyes instantly locked onto the serial number etched on the side. I did not need glasses to recognize it. That was not a door lock. It was a Secure ID 5000, a military-grade biometric scanner used primarily for high-level encryption and authorizing large international banking transfers. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. He was not trying to secure the house. He was trying to clone my identity. He needed my fingerprint to bypass the two-factor authentication on my retirement accounts and to digitally sign the loan documents with the Russian mob. If he got my print into his system, he would not just steal my money, he would become me. He could sign anything, transfer anything, and destroy everything I had built without me ever leaving my chair. "Oh, that looks complicated," I stammered, playing up the confusion. "My fingers are so dry these days, son. Will it really work?" Brad patted my shoulder, his touch making my skin crawl. "Of course it will, Dad. It is top of the line. I just need to calibrate it with your thumbprint. It will only take a second. Why don't you go wash your hands so we get a clean reading? I will set it up in the living room." I nodded slowly and shuffled toward the sink. Okay. Let me just wash up." As soon as Brad turned his back to plug the device into his laptop, I grabbed the whiskey glass he had left on the counter from the night before. He had been drinking heavily to calm his nerves, and the glass was smudged with his greasy fingerprints. I wrapped it carefully in a paper towel and slipped it into the deep pocket of my cardigan. "I am going to get the special soap from the basement," I called out. "My hands are greasy from the lotion." "Take your time, Dad," Brad yelled back, distracted by his computer screen. I moved as fast as my legs would carry me down the stairs to my workshop. I locked the door and turned on the ventilation fan. I had 10 minutes at most before he came looking for me. I needed to pull off a piece of engineering that would make my old Boeing team proud. I placed Brad's whiskey glass under my magnifying lamp. The prints were messy, overlapping smears, but there was one perfect impression of his right thumb near the rim. It was clear. The ridges and whorls were distinct. I pulled out a bottle of cyanoacrylate, essentially industrial superglue, and poured a few drops into a small aluminum dish. I placed the dish and the glass inside a plastic fume hood I had built for model airplane parts. I turned on a small heater. The glue evaporated, creating a white vapor that adhered to the oils in the fingerprint. Within 2 minutes, the invisible print on the glass had turned into a hard, durable white frost. Now came the delicate part. I mixed a quick-setting liquid silicone compound. It was a fleshy pink color meant for theatrical prosthetics. I carefully brushed the liquid over the white fingerprint on the glass. I had to be precise. If the layer was too thick, it would look fake. If it was too thin, it would tear. My hands, which I had been pretending were shaky for days, were now steady as rock. I was in my element. I was not a victim in a basement. I was a craftsman. I peeled the cured silicone off the glass. It was a perfect negative mold of Brad's thumbprint. I poured a second layer of liquid latex into the mold. This time I mixed in a conductive graphite powder. Most people do not know that modern scanners work on capacitance. They need to feel the electrical conductivity of human skin. A piece of rubber will not work. You need something that conducts electricity just like a finger. I waited for the latex to cure, counting the seconds in my head. 120, 130. Upstairs I heard footsteps. "Dad, are you okay down there?" Brad called out, his voice echoing through the floorboards. "I am coming, son," I yelled back, making my voice sound weak and breathless. "Just finding the soap." I peeled the latex positive out of the mold. It was a thin, translucent skin like the shedding of a snake. I slipped it over my own right thumb. It fit perfectly. To the naked eye, it just looked like my skin, perhaps a little shiny, but in the dim light of the living room, it would pass. But the beauty of this trap was not just the disguise. It was the data. Brad wanted to register my fingerprint into his banking app so he could access it later using his own finger. But by wearing this prosthetic, I was about to register Brad's own fingerprint as the master key for Elijah Vance. That meant two things. First, whenever Brad tried to access my accounts later, he would use his own thumb and the system would let him in because it matched the profile I was about to give it. He would think he had successfully hacked me. Second, and this was the kill shot, every time he accessed the account, he would be leaving his own biometric signature at the digital crime scene. He was literally framing himself with every transaction. I rubbed a little dirt on the fake skin to hide the edges and trudged back upstairs. Brad was tapping his foot impatiently. Finally, he said, "Come on, Dad. Sit here." I sat on the sofa. The black scanner was blinking a soft blue light. It looked innocent, but I knew it was connected to a database that could strip me of my life savings in seconds. "Which finger?" I asked, holding up my trembling left hand. Brad sighed and grabbed my right hand. "The thumb, Dad. Always the thumb." He pulled my hand toward the device. I let my hand go limp. I let him do the work. He pressed my thumb, the one wearing his own stolen print, onto the cold glass sensor. My heart stopped. The fake skin felt slippery. If it slid even a millimeter, the scan would fail. If the graphite mixture was wrong, the capacitance sensor would reject it. The machine whirred. A red light flashed. Scanning. Brad muttered, "Hold still, Dad." "Stop shaking." "I am trying." I whined. "It is cold." He pressed down harder. I felt the latex pinch against my real skin. "Please hold. Please hold." Beep. The light turned green. Brad let out a whoop of joy. "Got it," he shouted. "Verification complete." He looked at his laptop screen. I could see the reflection of the progress bar reaching 100%. "Identity verified, Elijah Vance." "Perfect," Brad whispered. He looked at me, and for a second his mask slipped. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated triumph. "Thanks, Dad. You just made our lives a lot safer." "You are welcome, son," I said, cradling my right hand, pulling it back into my sleeve before he could see the edge of the latex beginning to peel. "I am glad I could help." Brad closed the laptop. "I have to go to the office to finish the setup," he said, grabbing the scanner. "Go rest, Dad. You look tired." He practically ran out the door. He was rushing to the bank or to his office to transfer the first batch of funds. He thought he had the golden key. He thought he had captured the soul of the old man. I watched his car speed away down the driveway. I slowly peeled the fake skin off my thumb. It came away with a wet, sticky sound. I held it up to the light. It was a small, fragile piece of rubber, but it was enough to hang a man. I walked to the kitchen and dropped the fake fingerprint into the garbage disposal. I flipped the switch. The blades roared, grinding the evidence into oblivion. "You are right, Brad," I said to the empty room. "I am tired. I am tired of your lies. I am tired of your greed. but mostly I am tired of waiting for the moment when you realize that you just signed your own death warrant. I went to the fridge and poured myself a glass of cold water. My hand was steady. The trap was armed. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the silence of a courtroom just before the verdict is read, and I knew exactly what that verdict was going to be. Here is the detailed content for Part 7, written in English, optimized for AI voice narration with a continuous flow and no special formatting. By Friday afternoon, the atmosphere in my house had become so toxic it felt like the air itself was pressurized. Brad was unraveling before my eyes. He was pacing the hallway like a caged tiger, his phone glued to his ear, whispering furious demands to whoever was on the other end. I knew it was the Russians. I knew the deadline was tonight. If he did not have the deed to the house signed and notarized by midnight, he was a dead man. Desperation makes men dangerous. A desperate man stops thinking about consequences and starts thinking only about survival. I should have known he would try to accelerate the timeline. I should have known he was done waiting for the drugs to work. I was in my bedroom pretending to nap when I heard the floorboards creak outside my door. It was a subtle sound, the kind only an old house makes when someone is trying to move without being heard. I lay still, keeping my breathing shallow and even. The footsteps paused at the top of the landing, then retreated. I waited 5 minutes. Then 10. Silence returned to the hallway, but my instincts were screaming. I got up and reached for my cane. I needed to go downstairs to the kitchen to keep up my routine of being the confused, wandering elder. I opened my bedroom door and shuffled into the hallway. The afternoon sun was streaming through the skylight, casting long, angular shadows across the oak floor. I approached the staircase. It was a beautiful curved structure that I had sanded and varnished myself 30 years ago. I knew every knot in the wood, every squeak in the risers. I reached out to grab the banister, but something made me stop. It was the light. The sun was hitting the top step at a sharp angle and the wood was gleaming. But it was gleaming too much. The varnish I used had a satin finish, a soft, low luster glow. This was different. This was a wet, high-gloss shine that looked almost liquid. I narrowed my eyes. My engineer brain kicked into high gear, analyzing the visual data. The refractive index was wrong. The viscosity was visible at the edge of the step where a tiny droplet was defying gravity, ready to drip down to the riser below. I sniffed the air. Underneath the smell of lemon polish, there was something else. Vegetable oil. Cooking oil. My stomach turned over. He had oiled the top 3 steps. It was a trap so simple and so brutal it took my breath away. He wanted me to fall. He wanted me to break a hip or crack my skull. If I fell down these stairs at my age, it would likely put me in a coma or kill me outright. And if I died, the power of attorney would kick in immediately, or if I was incapacitated, he could sign everything while I was unconscious in the ICU. I stood there gripping my cane, looking down into the abyss of the stairwell. I felt a cold, hard rage tightening my chest. He was not just a thief. He was trying to kill me. He was trying to murder the man who had welcomed him into this family, who had given him a home. I had a choice to make. I could turn around and go back to my room. I could call Nia. I could call the police. But if I did that, Brad would claim it was an accident. He would say the cleaner used the wrong polish. He would play the innocent, concerned son-in-law, and the loan sharks would still be waiting. The trap I had set with the FBI required him to go through with the signing tonight. I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to believe that I was out of the way. I looked at the stairs again. I calculated the trajectory. 12 steps, a landing, then another 8 steps. If I fell uncontrollably, the kinetic energy would shatter my femur. But I knew physics. I knew how to distribute impact. I had played football in college and I had trained in judo in the Marines. You do not fight the fall, you embrace it. You tuck your chin, you protect your head, you roll with the momentum. I took a deep breath. This was going to hurt. This was going to hurt like hell. But pain was just a signal. Pain was temporary. Victory was permanent. I moved closer to the edge. I grabbed the banister tight with my left hand, the hand hidden from the hallway view. I positioned my right foot on the oiled patch. It was slippery as ice. I let my weight shift forward. As soon as I felt gravity take hold, I let out a cry, a genuine sound of fear, because even when you plan it, falling is terrifying. "Whoa," I shouted. I let my feet slide out from under me. But instead of stiffening up, which causes breaks, I went limp. I tucked my chin to my chest to protect my neck. I released the banister. The world spun. My shoulder hit the third step hard. The impact jarred my teeth. I rolled, twisting my body so my fleshy hip took the brunt of the next impact rather than my spine. I tumbled down the first flight, hitting the landing with a thud that shook the walls. I did not go down the second flight. I stopped myself on the landing, groaning loudly, sprawling out in a tangled heap of limbs. Pain exploded in my shoulder and hip. It was real sharp, agonizing pain, but I wiggled my toes. I moved my fingers. Nothing was broken. I was bruised, battered, and winded, but I was whole. I lay there and I let out a scream, a long, high-pitched wail of distress that I knew would curdle the blood of anyone listening. Help! Naya! Help me! I heard a door slam upstairs. Heavy footsteps came pounding down the hall. Brad appeared at the top of the stairs. He stopped. He looked down at me. For 1 second, just one single heartbeat, I saw his face before he put his mask back on. He looked disappointed. He was looking for blood. He was looking for a twisted neck. He was checking to see if I was dead. When he saw me moving, a flicker of annoyance crossed his eyes. Then the mask slammed down. Dad. Oh my God, Dad. He came running down the stairs, skipping the oiled steps with a practiced ease that proved he knew exactly where the danger was. He knelt beside me, his face twisted into a parody of concern. Dad, can you hear me? Do not move. Oh God, what happened? I slipped. I gasped, squeezing my eyes shut to hide the hatred burning in them. The stairs, so slippery. Nia came running from the kitchen. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, her hands flying to her mouth. She screamed. It was a sound of pure terror. Daddy! Oh God! Brad, is he okay? He fell. Nia, Brad shouted, looking down at me with those cold, dead eyes, while his voice trembled with fake panic. He just slipped. I told him to be careful. I told him the cleaners just waxed the floors. Liar. I wanted to spit in his face. There were no cleaners. But I moaned instead, clutching my hip. It hurts, I whined, letting my voice crack. My hip! My head! We need to call 911. Nia sobbed, fumbling for her phone. No, Brad said sharply, too sharply. He softened his tone immediately. I mean, yes, of course, but the ambulance will take forever. I can drive him. It will be faster. He did not want paramedics seeing the oil. He wanted to clean it up before anyone official stepped foot in the house. No, I groaned loudly. No moving car. Ambulance. Need ambulance. I grabbed Nia's hand as she reached me. Nia, hospital, please. Nia nodded, tears streaming down her face. I am calling them Daddy. Right now. She dialed the number. Brad stood up, pacing the landing, running his hands through his hair. He was trapped. He could not stop her without looking suspicious. He glared at the top steps. He grabbed a throw rug from the hallway and casually kicked it over the oiled patch covering the evidence. Good thinking, Brad, I thought. Hide your tracks. But you forgot one thing. My trousers are soaked in that oil. The paramedics will smell it. The doctors will document it. And I will keep these pants as evidence. The next 10 minutes were a blur of siren lights and commotion. The paramedics arrived. They were professional and quick. They put a brace on my neck. They lifted me onto a stretcher. As they wheeled me out, I saw Brad standing in the doorway. He had his arm around Nia, comforting her. You go with him, baby, Brad said, kissing her forehead. Stay with Mom and Dad. I will stay here and clean up. I need to secure the house. I will join you as soon as I can. He was lying. He was not coming to the hospital. He was staying here because tonight was the night. With me in the hospital and Nia distracted, he had the house to himself. He had the freedom to meet the mobsters. He had the silence he needed to sign away my life. I looked at him as they loaded me into the ambulance. I made my eyes wide and fearful, playing the part to the bitter end. Brad, I whispered, grasping at the air. The house. Lock the door. He leaned in, smiling that shark smile. Do not worry, Dad. I will take care of everything. You just rest. The doors slammed shut. The engine roared. As we pulled away, I closed my eyes and let out a long, steady breath. The pain in my hip was throbbing, but it felt like victory. I was out of the house. Nia was safe with me, and Brad was alone. He thought he had cleared the board. He thought he had removed the king, but he did not realize that by sending me to the hospital, he had just given me the perfect alibi. I lay back on the stretcher and listened to the siren. Tonight, while doctors scanned my bruises for injuries I did not have, Brad would be signing a loan with criminal masterminds. And the moment his pen left the paper, the trap I had set with the FB, I would snap shut. The oil on the stairs was his weapon, but my absence was his grave. Nia held my hand in the ambulance. "I am so sorry, Daddy," she wept. "I should have been watching you." I squeezed her hand. "It is not your fault, honey," I said softly. "It is nobody's fault, but everything is going to be better soon. I promise." She thought I was comforting her. She did not know that I was making a promise of retribution. By tomorrow morning, the man who pushed me down those stairs would wish he had fallen with me. I closed my eyes and waited for the night to bring its justice. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft whir of the air conditioning. It was 2 a.m. My daughter Nia was asleep in the uncomfortable guest chair next to my bed, her head resting on her folded arms. She looked so young and vulnerable in the dim blue light. I watched her chest rise and fall and felt a fierce protective instinct surge through me. She thought she was keeping vigil over her injured father, but in reality, I was the one standing guard over her. I waited until her breathing was deep and steady before I reached into my overnight bag. I pulled out my laptop. It was an old ThinkPad, heavy and durable, much like me. To anyone watching, I was just an old man checking his emails or playing solitaire to pass the time. But my fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed and precision that would have shocked my son-in-law. I was not playing games. I was hunting. I bypassed the hospital's public Wi-Fi and tethered the laptop to my phone's encrypted hotspot. Then I engaged the virtual private network I had set up weeks ago. I typed in a command string that I had memorized back when computers took up entire rooms. I was tunneling back into my own home network. Brad thought he was smart because he had installed a few smart locks and a voice-activated speaker system. He did not realize that smart devices are just open doors if you know the knock. And I had built the house. I knew every digital door frame. The screen flickered, and then the live feed from the living room camera popped up. The quality was crystal clear. The house was dark, but the infrared sensors painted the room in ghostly shades of gray and white. Brad was not sleeping. He was not cleaning up the oil on the stairs either. He was in my study. I switched the camera view to the study. There he was. He had torn the room apart. Books were pulled off the shelves. Drawers were yanked open and left hanging. He looked frantic. His hair was disheveled and his tie was undone. He was looking for the safe. I watched as he approached the large oil painting of the ship behind my desk. He ripped it off the wall and threw it on the floor. There it was, the wall safe. He punched in the code, 091275, my anniversary, the fake code I had fed him during my performance of dementia. The light on the safe turned green. The door clicked open. I leaned back against my hospital pillows and smiled a cold, hard smile. Gotcha. Inside the safe, there was only one envelope. It was thick and heavy. I had prepared it carefully using parchment paper and the embossing seal I had stolen back from his forgery kit. To the untrained eye, it looked like the original deed to the property, free and clear of any liens. To a lawyer or a title company, it would look suspicious upon close inspection. But Brad was neither a lawyer nor a detail-oriented man. He was a desperate man drowning in debt. And a drowning man does not check the quality of the life raft he grabs. Brad ripped the envelope open. He pulled out the document. I saw his shoulders sag with relief. He kissed the paper. He actually kissed it. Then he pulled out his phone. I tapped a key on my laptop to intercept the audio from the smart speaker on his desk. His voice came through my headphones, tinny but distinct. "Volkov," he said, breathless. "It is Brad. I have it. I have the deed." There was a pause. I could hear a deep rumble on the other end, but I could not make out the words. "Yes," Brad continued, his voice regaining its arrogant swagger. "The old man is out of the picture. He had a little accident. He is in the hospital, sedated. The wife is a vegetable. The house is ours." I felt my blood boil. A little accident. He spoke about pushing me down the stairs as if it were a minor logistical hurdle he had cleared. "Listen," Brad said, pacing the room. "I will bring the papers tomorrow night. Bring the notary. Bring the money. We sign everything then. And Volkov, I want the interest stopped as of tonight." I held up my end of the bargain. He hung up. He stood there for a moment, holding the fake deed like a trophy. He had no idea that he was holding a worthless piece of paper. He had no idea that the real deed was already locked in a trust vault downtown. And he certainly had no idea that by inviting Volkov into my home to sign a fraudulent document, he was turning a family dispute into a federal racketeering case. But I was not done. The engineer in me needed to know the load-bearing capacity of this disaster. Why did he need $2 million so badly? Silas, the private investigator, had mentioned crypto gambling, but $2 million was a lot of bad bets. I minimized the camera feed and opened a new terminal window. During the fingerprint scanning charade yesterday, I had not just lifted his print. I had also noted the password he typed into his laptop. It was predictably weak. Success 2024. I used his credentials to log into his work cloud account. Brad was the CFO of a mid-sized logistics firm. It was a respectable job, or at least it was supposed to be. I started digging through the spreadsheets. I looked at the accounts receivable. I looked at the vendor payments. It took me about 20 minutes to find the cracks in the foundation. It started small. A $5,000 payment to a consulting firm that did not exist. Then $10,000. Then $50,000. I cross-referenced the consulting firm addresses. They were all shell companies registered to P.O. boxes in the Caymans. My God, I whispered. He was not just gambling his own money. He had been embezzling from his company for 2 years. He was stealing from investors to pay off his gambling debts, and when that hole got too deep, he borrowed from the Russians to plug it. Now the Russians wanted their money back, and he was trying to steal my house to pay them. It was a classic Ponzi scheme collapsing under its own weight. And like all collapsing structures, it was going to crush anyone standing near it. I looked at Nia sleeping in the chair. If Brad went down for this, he would take her down with him. The government would seize their joint assets. She would lose her car. She would lose her savings. She might even be investigated as an accomplice. I needed to sever the limb to save the body. I opened a new browser window. I navigated to the secure whistleblower portal of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. I began to type. I laid it all out. The shell companies, the fraudulent invoices, the dates and amounts. I attached the spreadsheets I had just downloaded from his work account. It was a smoking gun. It was enough to send him to federal prison for 15 years for corporate fraud and embezzlement. My finger hovered over the submit button. If I sent it now, the FBI might arrest him tomorrow morning at his office. That would save the house. But it would leave the Russian mob issue unresolved. If Brad went to jail without paying Volkov, the mob would still come looking for their money. They might come after Nia. They might come after Beatrice. No, I needed the Russians to be neutralized too. I needed them caught in the act of committing a crime on American soil. I looked at the clock. It was almost 3 a.m. I did not click submit. Instead, I clicked schedule send. I set the date for Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. This was the dead man's switch. Here was the plan. Tomorrow night is Saturday. Brad would meet the Russians. He would sign the loan. The FBI would bust them for the bank fraud and the mob activity. That takes care of the immediate physical threat. But if for some reason Brad managed to wiggle out of that, if he managed to cut a deal, or if the bust went wrong, this email would trigger on Tuesday morning. No matter what happened this weekend, his career was over. His freedom was over. I watched the screen confirm the scheduled delivery. A small green checkmark appeared. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I closed the laptop and slipped it back into my bag. I lay back in the hospital bed listening to the beep, beep, beep of the monitor. It sounded like a countdown. 30 hours. That was all Brad had left. 30 hours of thinking he was the king of the world. 30 hours of thinking he had outsmarted the old man. I looked at Nia again. I wanted to wake her up and tell her everything. I wanted to tell her that her husband was a criminal and a traitor. But I could not. Not yet. She needed to see it with her own eyes. She needed to see the handcuffs. She needed to hear the confession. Pain shot through my hip, reminding me of the fall. I welcomed it. It kept me sharp. Brad. I thought, staring up at the dark ceiling tiles. You pushed me down the stairs because you thought I was weak. You thought I was just an obstacle to be removed. But you forgot the first rule of engineering. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You pushed me down. Now I am going to pull the ground out from under you. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I visualized the plan step by step, checking for failures, checking for variables. The house, the trust, the cameras, the FBI, the SEC, It was a complex machine, a machine designed for one purpose: total demolition. And tomorrow night I would push the start button. The ride back from the hospital was silent and heavy like a funeral procession before the body has even died. I sat in the back seat of Nia's car, clutching my cane, my hip throbbing with a dull, persistent ache that reminded me with every bump in the road of what my son-in-law had done to me. Brad drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, his eyes darting constantly to the rearview mirror. He was not checking on me. He was checking the time. The clock was ticking down to his meeting with the Russian mob, and I was the last obstacle he needed to clear from the board. When we arrived home, the house felt different. It was no longer the sanctuary I had built with my own hands. It felt like a stage set for a tragedy. Beatrice was sitting in her usual chair by the window, staring at the rain, her mind lost in the chemical fog Brad had forced upon her. I limped into the living room and collapsed onto the sofa, letting out a groan that was only half fake. I needed Nia to see my pain. I needed her to see her father broken and frail, because that was the only way she would agree to what Brad was about to propose. "You should rest, Dad," Nia said, her voice trembling. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she had chewed her fingernails down to the quick. She was a woman on the edge of a breakdown, and Brad knew exactly how to push her over. "I am okay, honey," I whispered, closing my eyes. Just tired." Brad did not wait. He did not even let me get settled. He walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, drinking it in one long gulp before turning to Nia. "We need to talk," he said. "Now." Nia looked at me, then at her mother. "Can it wait, Brad? Dad just got out of the hospital." "No, it cannot wait," Brad snapped. His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a whip. He softened it immediately, a practiced manipulator adjusting his mask. "I mean, look at them, Nia. Just look at them." I kept my eyes closed, but my ears were wide open. I slowed my breathing, pretending to drift off into a painkiller-induced sleep. Nia walked into the kitchen with him. They thought they were out of earshot, but the acoustics of this house were designed by an engineer. If you stood in the right spot near the hallway arch, the sound from the kitchen traveled perfectly. "We cannot keep doing this, Nia," Brad said, his voice low and urgent. "Did you see him today? He fell down the stairs. He could have broken his neck. He could have died right there in the hallway while you were at the grocery store." "I know, Brad. I know." Nia sobbed softly. But nothing." Brad interrupted. "Next time it will not be a bruised hip. Next time it will be a brain bleed. Or maybe he leaves the gas on and blows the whole house up. Or maybe your mom wanders out into the street and gets hit by a bus. Are you ready to live with that guilt?" I lay on the sofa, gripping the fabric of the cushion until my knuckles turned white. He was using the fall he caused, as a weapon against his wife. He was twisting her love for me into a noose. "I cannot just send them away, Brad," Nia pleaded. "This is their home. Dad built this house. He loves this place." "It is not a home anymore," Brad hissed. "It is a death trap. Look, I found this place called The Meadows. It is high-end. 24-hour medical staff, memory care specialists. They are expecting us. I already called them." "You called them?" Nia asked, shocked. "Without asking me." "I had to," Brad said, stepping closer to her. I could hear the rustle of his clothes. He was crowding her, using his physical presence to intimidate her. "I had to be the strong one because you are too emotional to make the hard choice. The paperwork is ready. They have a double suite available, but only if we sign today. If we wait, we lose the spot and they go on a 6-month waiting list. Do you want to risk 6 more months of this? Do you want to find your dad at the bottom of the stairs again?" There was a silence. A long, agonizing silence. I could imagine Nia standing there, tears streaming down her face, torn between her heart and the terrifying reality Brad was painting for her. "It is $5,000 a month," Nia whispered. "We do not have that kind of money." Brad hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I will handle the money," he said quickly. I have some investments maturing, and eventually we can sell this house to cover the costs. It is too big for us anyway." There it was. The end game. Sell the house. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to march into that kitchen and smash my cane across his face. I wanted to tell Nia that her husband was a liar, a thief, and a potential murderer. I wanted to hold my daughter and tell her that her daddy was fine, that he was still the strong man who used to carry her on his shoulders. But I stayed frozen. If I intervened now, I would win the battle but lose the war. Brad would deny everything. He would say I was delirious from the pain medication. He would say he was just trying to help. And the Russians would still be coming. The FBI trap would fail. I had to let this happen. I had to let my daughter break so I could fix her later. But it hurts. God, it hurts more than the fall. It hurts to hear the man she loves gaslight her into believing she is failing us. Nia, he said softly, his voice dropping to that seductive whisper he used to manipulate her. Do it for them. If you love them, let them go to a place where they are safe. Do not be selfish. Selfish, he called her selfish. The woman who had spent every weekend for the last 5 years caring for us. I heard a sniffle, then the sound of a chair being pulled out. Where do I sign? Nia asked, her voice barely audible. Right here, Brad said, the sound of paper rustling. And here, and here. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. It was a dry, scratching sound like a rat gnawing on wood. With every stroke of that pen, Nia was signing away her parents' freedom. She was signing away her inheritance. She was giving legal custody of our lives to a facility Brad had likely chosen for its low cost and high security. I lay there, tears leaking from my closed eyes, running down into my ears. I was not crying for myself. I was crying for her, for the betrayal she was experiencing without even knowing it. Okay, Brad said. Good girl. You did the right thing. I will call the transport service. They will be here tomorrow morning at 10. Tomorrow morning. He was not wasting a single second. Nia walked out of the kitchen. She came into the living room and knelt beside the sofa. I could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of fear and sadness. She took my hand, my rough, callous hand in her soft ones. Daddy, she whispered. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I just want you to be safe. I felt her tears dripping onto my skin. It took every ounce of discipline I had learned in the Marine Corps not to open my eyes and comfort her. I had to remain the vegetable. I had to remain the burden. I let out a soft, snoring sound and twitched my hands slightly. Nia kissed my forehead. I love you, Daddy, she said. She stood up and went upstairs to pack our bags. I heard her sobbing all the way up the steps. Brad came into the living room a moment later. He stood over me. I could feel his gaze. It was not a gaze of concern. It was a gaze of triumph. You had a good run, old man, he whispered to my sleeping form. But it is my turn now. You built the house, but I am the one who is going to cash it in. He walked away whistling a low tune. He went into his office and I heard him making a call. Volkov, he said. It is done. The obstacles are being removed tomorrow morning. Bring the notary at 8 p.m. The house is yours. I opened my eyes just a sliver. The room was dark, but my vision was clear. You think you have won, son, I thought, staring at the back of his retreating figure. You think you just cleared the board. But you did not just sign a nursing home admission. You just signed a confession. Nia signing those papers was the final piece of evidence I needed. It proved coercion. It proved undue influence. It proved that he manipulated a distressed family member to facilitate his fraud. I closed my eyes again. Let him whistle. Let him celebrate. Because tomorrow morning when that transport van arrives, he is not going to be sending a helpless old couple to their doom. He is going to be sending 2 undercover agents to a safe house. And when he opens the door to the Russians tomorrow night, he is going to find out that the only thing he owns in this world is a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary. Sleep well, Nia, I whispered in my mind. Your daddy has got this. I will endure the humiliation. I will endure the pain. Because tomorrow the ghost in this house is going to stop haunting and start hunting. Saturday morning arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick and cold, the kind of damp that settles into your bones and stays there. I was sitting in my wheelchair in the hallway wearing a coat that felt too big for me now. Beatrice was beside me staring at her hands. We were like 2 pieces of old unwanted furniture waiting to be hauled away to the dump. The transport van from the Meadows arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. It was a white, windowless vehicle that looked more like a dog catcher's truck than a medical transport. 2 large men in blue scrubs got out. They did not smile. They did not introduce themselves. They just walked up the driveway with the efficiency of movers who get paid by the hour. Brad met them at the door. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a cup of coffee, looking every inch the concerned, grieving relative. He shook hands with the driver and pointed at us. "They are ready," he said, his voice low and somber. "Please be gentle." My father-in-law is very confused today. He thinks he is going on a fishing trip. I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair. I was not confused. I was hyper-aware. I saw the way Brad glanced at his watch 3 times in 1 minute. I saw the way he avoided looking Nia in the eye. Nia was standing by the stairs, weeping silently into a tissue. She looked broken. "Daddy," she whispered as the orderlies wheeled me toward the door. "I love you. Love. I will visit every Sunday. I promise." I wanted to reach out and wipe her tears away. I wanted to tell her that she would see me a lot sooner than Sunday. But I just nodded, letting my head bob unsteadily. "Fishing," I mumbled, drooling a little for effect. "Catch the big one." Brad patted my shoulder. His hand felt heavy and cold. "Sure, Dad. You catch the big one." He leaned in close to my ear so only I could hear. "Goodbye, Elijah. Do not worry about the house. I will take good care of it." The arrogance in his voice made my stomach turn. He was gloating. He was kicking a man he thought was down. The orderlies lifted Beatrice into the van first. Then they came for me. As they rolled me out into the gray morning light, I took one last look at my house. The brick facade I had pointed myself. The oak tree I had planted when Nia was born. It looked lonely. Brad stood in the doorway with his arm around Nia, playing the role of the supportive husband. He waved. A small, sad wave for Nia is benefit, but his eyes were dancing with victory. He watched as the heavy metal doors of the van slammed shut, sealing us inside the gloom. I heard the lock click. It sounded like a gunshot. The engine roared to life and we began to move. I felt the van back out of the driveway and turn onto the main road. I counted the seconds in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. We drove for about 5 minutes in silence. The orderly in the back with us was looking at his phone, bored. Beatrice was humming a tune from her childhood, rocking back and forth. When I was sure we were far enough away from the house, I sat up straight. I rolled my neck, cracking the stiffness out of my spine. I wiped the fake drool from my chin with a handkerchief I pulled from my pocket. "You can drop the act now, gentlemen," I said, my voice strong and clear. The orderly in the back looked up and grinned. He was not a nurse. He was an ex-Marine named Tyrell who used to work security for my engineering firm. "Copy that," Mr. Vance, Tyrell said, pocketing his phone. "You holding up okay, boss?" "I am fine, Tyrell," I said, unbuckling the straps that held me to the wheelchair. "Just a little stiff from playing the vegetable. Tell the driver to switch to the secure route." Tyrell knocked on the partition. "Hey, Marcus, package is secure. Execute Plan B." The van took a sharp left turn. We were not going to the meadows. We were not going to any nursing home. "Where are we going?" Beatrice asked. Her voice was small and frightened. The sudden change in atmosphere had pierced through her fog. I reached over and took her hand. "We are going on a vacation, B. A real one. No doctors, no pills, just us." We drove for an hour, heading east out of the city toward the Cascade Mountains. The gray urban sprawl gave way to towering evergreen trees and misty peaks. The air in the van felt lighter. We arrived at the Silver Lake Lodge, a private resort owned by a friend of mine. It was a place for wealthy executives to detox and hide from the press. But for the next 2 days, it was my command center. Tyrell and Marcus helped us into a private cabin overlooking the lake. It was warm inside with a crackling fire and comfortable leather furniture. No hospital beds, no smell of antiseptic. I got Beatrice settled on a sofa with a warm blanket and a cup of genuine tea. I threw the bottle of blue pills Brad had packed for her into the fireplace. I watched the plastic melt and curl in the flames. "No more poison," I whispered. Within an hour, a private doctor I had hired arrived. He examined Beatrice. "She is dehydrated and her vitals are suppressed," the doctor said, checking her pupils. "But now that she is off the haloperidol, she should start to clear up within 24 hours. The damage is not permanent, Elijah. You got her out just in time." I felt a wave of relief so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. I had saved her. Now I had to save everything else. I went into the second bedroom, which Tyrell had already set up as a monitoring station. There were 3 large monitors on the desk connected to a high-speed satellite uplink. I sat down and opened my laptop. I typed in the encryption keys and linked the system to the cameras back at the house. The screens flickered to life. There it was. My living room. It was empty and quiet. I switched to the kitchen camera. Nia was sitting at the table, her head in her hands, crying. Brad was standing behind her, rubbing her back. He was talking. I turned up the volume. "I know it is hard," baby Brad was saying. "But look at how peaceful the house is. No more chaos. No more worrying about pills or falls. We can finally breathe." Nia nodded, wiping her eyes. "I guess so. I just feel so guilty, Brad." "Do not feel guilty," Brad said, kissing the top of her head. "Feel relieved. Now why don't you go upstairs and take a nap? You look exhausted. I have some work to do in the office." He wanted her out of the way. He wanted the stage cleared. Nia stood up and walked out of the frame. As soon as she was gone, Brad's demeanor changed instantly. He stopped looking sad. He stopped stooping. He stretched his arms over his head and let out a loud whoop of joy. "Yes," he shouted to the empty room. "Yes. Finally." He walked over to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of champagne. He popped the cork, the sound echoing through the speakers in my cabin. He took a swig straight from the bottle. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Volkov," he said. "The nest is empty. The birds have flown. Come over at 8. Bring the money. I am ready to sign." I sat back in my chair watching him celebrate. He looked so confident. He looked like a man who owned the world. "Enjoy your drink, son," I said to the screen, "because that is the last taste of freedom you are ever going to have." I checked the other monitors. One screen showed the GPS tracker of the FBI surveillance van that was currently parking down the street from my house disguised as a plumbing truck. I had sent them the tip-off hours ago anonymously, but with enough evidence to warrant a stakeout. The other screen showed the bank transfer protocols for the Vance family trust. The assets were locked. The deed Brad was holding was worthless. I picked up the radio. "Tyrell, come in." "Go ahead, boss," Tyrell's voice crackled. "Is the perimeter secure?" "We have eyes on the driveway," Tyrell said. "No sign of the Russians yet, but the feds are in position." "Good," I said. "Stay out of sight. I want Brad to feel completely safe until the moment the trap snaps shut." I looked at the image of Brad one last time. He was dancing, actually dancing around my kitchen. He was moonwalking across the floor I had tiled. It was pathetic. It was infuriating, but it was also satisfying in a dark, twisted way. He thinks the house is empty, I thought. He thinks he chased the ghosts away. But he forgot that I built this house. I am in the walls. I am in the wires. I am everywhere. I turned away from the screens and went back to Beatrice. She was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. Her color was already returning. I sat beside her and held her hand. "Tonight, Bea," I whispered. "Tonight, we take it all back." Outside the cabin, the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the lake. The sky turned a deep blood red. Back in the city, the storm was gathering. The players were moving into position. The stage was set for the final act. I was not just an old man anymore. I was the director of a play that would end in tragedy for the villain and justice for the victims. And the curtain was about to rise. The sun had gone down hours ago, leaving the sky a bruised purple that matched the color of my anger. It was Saturday night, 8 o'clock, the witching hour. At the resort, Beatrice was sleeping peacefully in the master bedroom, finally free from the chemical fog that had imprisoned her mind. But I was not sleeping. I was sitting in the command chair of my makeshift operations center, staring at 3 high-definition monitors that were broadcasting a live feed of the violation of my home. Back in Seattle, the house was dark except for the lights in the living room, which Brad had turned up to full brightness. He wanted the house to look inviting. He wanted it to look expensive. He was wearing his best suit, a navy blue Italian cut that cost more than my first car, pacing back and forth on the oriental rug. He checked his watch every 30 seconds. He smoothed his hair. He adjusted his tie. He looked like a man preparing for a date with a firing squad. And in a way, he was. At 8:05 p.m., headlights swept across the driveway. Not just one car, but 3. Heavy black SUVs with tinted windows, the kind used by government officials or high-level criminals. They pulled up to the front door with an aggressive speed, braking hard at the last second. I leaned closer to the screen. "Here we go," I whispered. The doors opened and men spilled out. They were big men with thick necks and suits that strained across their shoulders. They did not look at the garden. They did not admire the architecture. They scanned the perimeter for threats. Then the middle car door opened, and Nikolai Volkov stepped out. I had seen his photo in the file Silas gave me, but seeing him live in my driveway was different. He was a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a beard that looked like steel wool. He wore a long cashmere coat left open to reveal a silk shirt and a thick gold chain. Even through the camera lens, he radiated a terrifying aura of violence. Behind him walked a smaller man carrying a briefcase. This had to be the lawyer. He looked nervous, clutching the handle of his case with both hands, his eyes darting around like a rat in a room full of cats. Brad opened the front door before they even knocked. "Mr. Volkov." Brad said, his voice cracking slightly. "Welcome. Please come in." Volkov did not answer. He just walked past Brad as if he were a doorman stepping into the foyer with muddy boots. He stopped in the center of the hallway and looked up at the chandelier. He sniffed the air. "Nice place," Volkov rumbled. His voice was deep, heavily accented, a sound like gravel grinding in a mixer. "Smells like old money." "It is," Brad said, closing the door quickly, locking out the night. 5,000 square feet, custom finishes. My in-laws built it, but, well, it is mine now. Volkov laughed, a short bark of a laugh. "Yours. We will see." They moved into the living room. My sanctuary. The place where I had read bedtime stories to Nia. The place where Beatrice and I had danced on our anniversaries. Now it was filled with the stench of corruption. Volkov sat down in my leather armchair. He did not sit respectfully. He sprawled legs wide, taking up space, claiming ownership. His bodyguards took up positions by the windows, blocking the view of the street. The lawyer sat on the edge of the sofa, opening his briefcase on the coffee table. He pulled out a stack of documents. Brad stood in the middle of the room, wringing his hands. Can I get you a drink? I have a 1982 Bordeaux. Very rare." Volkov waved a hand dismissively. "Vodka. And a glass for my friend here." Brad scrambled to the wet bar. I watched him pour the drinks, his hands shaking so badly the bottle clinked against the glass. He brought them over, acting like a servant in his own usurped kingdom. Volkov took the glass and downed it in one gulp. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cigar. It was a thick, dark Cuban. Brad froze. He hated smoke. He was a fitness fanatic who did not even allow candles in the house because of the air quality. I saw him open his mouth to protest, to say that this was a non-smoking home. But Volkov pulled out a gold lighter and flicked it. The flame roared. He lit the cigar, puffing thick gray clouds of smoke into the room. Brad closed his mouth. He said nothing. He watched the smoke curl up toward the pristine white ceiling, and he swallowed his pride. "Nice humidor," Volkov said, blowing smoke toward my family portraits on the mantelpiece. Then came the moment that made me grip the edge of my desk so hard the wood groaned. Volkov stood up and walked over to the side table where I kept my most invalid possession. It was a small, folded American flag in a triangular case sitting next to a photo of my father in his uniform. It was the flag they gave me at his funeral. It was sacred ground. Volkov picked up the case. He turned it over in his heavy hands, leaving greasy fingerprints on the glass. "Your father," Volkov asked, looking at the photo. My wife is..." "Father," Brad stammered. Volkov sneered. "He looks like a hard man, a soldier." "He was," Brad said, eager to please. "A Marine." Volkov grunted. He put the flag case back down, but he did not put it back gently. He used it to tap the ash from his cigar. He ashed his cigar on the glass case of "My father is" flag. I felt a roar build in my chest, a sound so primal it frightened me. I wanted to reach through the screen and tear his throat out. I wanted to burn the world down to make him pay for that disrespect. But I forced myself to breathe. I forced the Marine inside me to stand down. "Not yet," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. "Not yet. Let him do it. Let him dig the hole deeper." Volkov returned to the chair and kicked his feet up onto the coffee table. His muddy boots rested on the walnut surface I had sanded by hand. "Okay," Volkov said, pointing at the lawyer. "Let us look at the paper. I do not have all night. I have a flight to Macau in 3 hours. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, if you could please present the deed and the power of attorney." Brad rushed to his briefcase. He pulled out the envelope he had taken from the safe the night before. He handed over the forged documents with a trembling hand. "Here it is," Brad said, "the original deed, and the medical power of attorney signed by Elijah Vance, granting me full control." The lawyer took the papers. He adjusted his glasses and turned on a small lamp. He began to examine them. I shifted my gaze to the second monitor. It showed a complex network diagram. A green line indicated that the data stream from my cameras was being encrypted and rerouted. Destination: Federal Bureau of Investigation Field Office, Seattle Cybercrime Division. I picked up my phone and dialed a number that was not in my contacts list. Agent Miller, I said. No relation to Brad. Thank God. Vance, the voice on the other end, answered crisp and alert. We are watching. The audio is clear. Did you see what he did to the flag? I asked, my voice low. I saw it. Eli, Agent Miller said, softness creeping into his professional tone. We all saw it. Hold the line. We need the signature. We need the transaction to initiate. I looked back at the screen. The lawyer was nodding. The documents appear to be in order, Mr. Volkov, the lawyer said. The notary stamps look authentic. The signatures match the samples. Volkov smiled, a cruel shark-like smile. Good. Then we do business. He snapped his fingers. One of the bodyguards stepped forward and placed a metal briefcase on the table. He opened it. Inside were stacks of cash, but not 2 million, maybe 50,000. Brad looked confused. Where is the rest? Volkov laughed. The rest is a wire transfer, you idiot. This is just a signing bonus, to show good faith, and to pay for the cleaning of your rug. He flicked more ash onto the floor. Brad stared at the money. Greed warred with fear in his eyes. He reached out and touched a stack of bills. Okay, Brad whispered. Okay, let us sign. The lawyer pushed a contract across the table. It was a loan agreement, predatory, illegal, and binding. Brad picked up a pen. It was my pen. A Mont Blanc Beatrice gave me for my retirement. He clicked the pen. I watched him lean over the table. The camera zoomed in automatically, focusing on the tip of the pen as it hovered over the signature line. This was it. The moment of no return. Once that pen touched the paper, Brad was committing bank fraud, wire fraud, and entering into a contract with a known terrorist organization. I held my breath. Do it, I hissed at the screen. Sign your life away. Brad hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked up at Volkov. He looked at the smoke filling the room. He looked at the mud on the table. For a second, I thought he might stop. I thought he might realize that no amount of money was worth this degradation. But then he looked at the cash. He lowered the pen. He began to write. B-R-A-D. The ink flowed black and permanent. I exhaled. Agent Miller, I said into the phone. The pen is down. The signature is complete. Copy that, Vance, Agent Miller replied. We are initiating the takedown. Give us 2 minutes to breach the perimeter. Keep the feed running. I sat back in my chair. The rage was still there, cold and hard in my stomach, but it was joined by a grim satisfaction. Brad handed the paper to Volkov. Done, Brad said, trying to sound confident but sounding only weak. Now, when does the wire transfer hit? Volkov picked up the paper. He blew on the ink. It hits, Volkov said, grinning, showing gold-capped teeth whenever I say it hits. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. Brad's face fell. But you said tonight. Volkov stood up, towering over him. I altered the deal. Pray I do not alter it further. Brad stood there stunned, realizing too late that he had sold his soul to a devil who did not honor contracts. But he did not know that a different kind of devil was watching him. A devil he had created. I watched them toast. Volkov raised his glass of vodka. To new partnerships. To hell, I whispered. I looked at the timer on the FBI feed. T-minus 60 seconds to breach. I reached for the keyboard. I had one more surprise for them before the police kicked down the door. I wanted them to know who did this. I wanted them to know that the house was not empty. I typed in a command. The mousetrap protocol. I hovered my finger over the enter key. Get comfortable, gentlemen, I said to the silent room, because nobody is leaving this party. I pressed the key. The smoke from Volkov's cigar hung heavy in the air of my living room, creating a blue haze that distorted the image on my monitors back at the resort. I sat forward in my chair, my eyes locking onto the high-definition feed. The time for games was over. The negotiation was beginning, and I needed to witness every single second of it, because this was not just a business deal. It was the dismantling of a human soul. Brad was standing by the fireplace, sweating through his expensive shirt, while Volkov sat like a king on a throne, his muddy boots still resting on my coffee table. "Let us talk about the terms," Volkov said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the speakers. He picked up the loan agreement and flicked the edge of the paper with his thick finger. The original agreement was for $2 million at 15% interest. That was the friends and family rate. But you are not family, Bradley. And after looking at your payment history, I certainly do not consider you a friend. Brad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. We agreed on 15%, Nikolai. That was the deal. I have the collateral right here. The house is worth $5 million. It is more than double what I am asking for. Volkov laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Collateral is messy. Collateral takes time to liquidate. If you default, I have to evict 2 old people. I have to deal with the police. I have to sell the property. That is work. I do not like work. I like cash. So because of the extra risk, the rate has changed. Brad took a step forward, his hands trembling. Changed to what? 30%, Volkov said calmly. Monthly. Compounding. I watched Brad's face drain of color. He was a finance guy. He knew exactly what those numbers meant. 30% monthly compounding was not a loan. It was a death sentence. It meant that within 3 months, the debt would double. It meant that he would never be able to pay it off unless he sold the house immediately. 30%, Brad choked out. That is insanity. I cannot agree to that. Volkov shrugged and made a motion to stand up. Fine, then I leave. And on Monday morning, my associates will pay a visit to your office, and maybe to your wife at the grocery store, and maybe to that nice car you drive. He was bluffing about leaving, but the threat was real. Brad knew it. I could see the panic warring with the greed in his eyes. He did the math in his head. I could almost hear the gears turning. He was thinking that if he signed now, he would have the $2 million. He could pay off his old debts. Then he would put the house on the market tomorrow. Even if he had to sell it cheap for $4 million, he would still have enough to pay Volkov back the principal, plus the exorbitant interest, and walk away with $1 million of profit. He was betting everything on a quick sale. He was betting everything on a house he did not own. Brad wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Okay, he whispered. Okay, 30%. But I need the money wired tonight, immediately upon signing. Volkov sat back down, smiling that shark smile. See, I knew you were a reasonable man. Sit down, Bradley. Let us look at your papers. Brad sat on the edge of the sofa. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the 2 documents that were going to seal his fate. The first was the power of attorney, the one forged in my kitchen 3 nights ago with the help of the man in the dark coat, the one that declared Elijah Vance a mental incompetent and gave Bradley Miller the right to sign his name. The second document was the deed, the red-stamped heavy bond paper that represented ownership of 42 Oak Creek Drive. I held my breath as he handed them over. This was the moment of truth. If the lawyer looked too closely at the deed, he might notice that the embossing seal was slightly off-center. He might notice that the county clerk stamp was from a registrar who had retired 2 years ago. I had forged that deed myself in my basement workshop using old skills from my days drafting blueprints. It was a masterpiece of deception, but it was still a fake. The lawyer, a small man with glasses thick as bottle bottoms, took the documents. He pulled out a jeweler's loop and screwed it into his eye. He leaned over the coffee table, turning the lamp up to full brightness. Silence stretched in the room. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the heavy breathing of the bodyguards. Brad held his breath. I held my breath. The lawyer ran his finger over the seal on the deed. He held the power of attorney up to the light, checking the watermark. He looked at the signature of the doctor who had supposedly declared me incompetent. It is Dr. Eris Thorne, the lawyer muttered. I know him. He is expensive, but his paperwork is usually bulletproof. He is the best, Brad said quickly. He has been treating Elijah for years. The dementia is advanced, very tragic. The lawyer dropped the papers onto the table. They look valid, Mr. Volkov. The chain of title is clean. The power of attorney is comprehensive. Mr. Miller has the full legal authority to leverage this asset. Volkov nodded. He did not care about the tragedy. He only cared about the leverage. Good, Volkov said. Then we sign. The lawyer pushed a heavy contract across the table. It was thick bound in blue paper. It was a promissory note securing the loan against the property. By signing it, Brad was not just borrowing money. He was committing mortgage fraud on a massive scale. He was pledging an asset he had stolen using a forged authority. And because the lender was a known organized crime syndicate operating across international borders, the transaction triggered the RICO statutes, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. Brad reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen. I recognized it immediately. It was my Mont Blanc, the one with my initials EV engraved on the cap. He was going to use my own pen to sign away my life. The disrespect was staggering, but I pushed the anger down. Use the pen, son, I thought. Use it. It writes beautifully. It will write your confession perfectly. Brad clicked the cap. He leaned over the document. His hand was shaking so badly the pen hovered over the paper like a hummingbird. Sign it, Volkov commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. Brad took a deep breath. He pressed the nib to the paper. Scritch. Scratch. The sound was audible even through the microphone. Bradley Miller, trustee for Elijah Vance. He signed his name, then he signed mine. I exhaled a long, shuddering breath. It was done. The crime was complete. The physical act had been recorded in high definition from 3 different angles. Now the money, Volkov said. He pulled out a secure tablet. He typed in a sequence of codes. He turned the screen toward Brad. Account ending in 4490. Brad asked, his voice trembling with anticipation. That is the one, Volkov said. $2 million. Sending now. He pressed a button on the screen. On the desk in the living room, Brad's laptop let out a cheerful ping. It was the notification sound of a wire transfer arriving. Brad scrambled over to the laptop. He tapped the keys frantically, logging into his offshore account. His eyes widened. A grin spread across his face that was pure euphoric greed. It is there, he shouted. It is all there. 2 million, he laughed. A hysterical, high-pitched laugh. He spun around and looked at Volkov. Thank you, Nikolai. You will not regret this. I will have the house sold in a week. You will have your money back plus the interest. Volkov did not smile. He just puffed on his cigar. I know I will have my money back, Volkov said quietly. Because if I do not, I will take the house. And I will take your fingers. One by one. Brad did not even hear the threat. He was too drunk on his own success. He poured himself another glass of my wine. He raised it in the air. To partnerships, he said, beaming. I sat back in my chair at the resort. The feed was still running. The audio was still crisp. Agent Miller, I said into my phone. Did you get that? Loud and clear, Mr. Vance, the FBI agent replied. We have the wire transfer confirmation. We have the signature. We have the admission of the repayment terms. It is a slam dunk. Are you ready to move? I asked. Teams are in position, Agent Miller said. We are cutting the power in 10 seconds. I looked at the screen one last time. Brad was taking a sip of wine. He looked around the room feeling like the master of his domain. He thought he had won. He thought the old man was rotting in a nursing home and the wife was a vegetable and the daughter was a puppet. He had no idea that the walls were about to close in. I typed a command into my laptop. It was a simple script linked to the smart home controller. System override. Lockdown mode. Initiate. I watched the screen. Suddenly the lights in the living room flickered and died. The house was plunged into pitch-black darkness. Hey, Brad's voice shouted out of the gloom. What happened? Who turned out the lights? I heard the sound of heavy movement. The bodyguards were reaching for their weapons. Relax, Volkov's voice rumbled. It is probably just a fuse. This old house wiring is garbage. No, I whispered. It is not a fuse. It is the end of the line. I pressed the enter key on my laptop. On the screen in the darkened living room, the massive 80-inch television mounted above the fireplace suddenly roared to life. It did not show a TV show. It showed a bright white static that illuminated the terrified faces of the men in the room. And then the static cleared. And there I was. Not the live me sitting in the resort, but a pre-recorded video I had made an hour ago. I was wearing my best suit. I was sitting in a leather chair looking straight into the camera. My expression was not one of confusion or dementia. It was the cold, hard stare of a judge delivering a sentence. Hello, Bradley. My recorded voice boomed through the surround sound speakers shaking the floorboards. I saw Brad freeze. He dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the floor. If you are seeing this, it means you just signed the papers. The video continued. It means you just accepted $2 million of dirty money. And it means you made the biggest mistake of your life. Who is that? Volkov shouted, standing up and pulling a gun from his coat. Is that the old man? I thought you said he was a vegetable. He is, Brad stammered, backing away. He is supposed to be. You thought I was weak, my video voice said, relentless and booming. You thought you could drug my wife. You thought you could push me down the stairs. You thought you could steal the house I built with my own hands. But you forgot one thing, son. The video zoomed in on my face. I am an engineer, and I never build anything without a kill switch. Suddenly, the heavy security shutters on the windows and doors slammed down with a deafening clang. The electronic locks engaged with a mechanical thud that sounded like a prison cell closing. They were trapped. I watched Brad spin around, running to the front door, pulling uselessly on the handle. He was screaming now. Let me out. Open the door. And then came the sirens. Not one or two, but a symphony of them wailing from every direction, closing in on the house like a pack of wolves. I leaned into the microphone of my phone. Go get him, Agent Miller. And as the blue and red lights began to flash through the cracks in the shutters, painting the room in a chaotic strobe of color, I finally smiled. The transaction was complete. The crime was committed, and the payment was due. The celebration in my living room was disgusting to watch. Brad held his wine glass up to the light, swirling the expensive vintage liquid like he was some kind of aristocrat. He clinked his glass against Volkov, his heavy tumbler of vodka. The sound rang out sharp and clear through the speakers in my command center at the resort. To new beginnings, Brad said, his face flushed with the intoxication of what he thought was a victory. To getting everything we deserve. I sat back in my leather chair, my finger hovering over the enter key on my laptop. You are right, son, I whispered to the screen. You are absolutely right. You are about to get exactly what you deserve. Volkov downed his drink and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked at the signed documents on the table, then at the metal briefcase full of cash. Good business, he grunted. Now we leave. My plane is waiting. He stood up, signaling his bodyguards. Brad moved to escort them to the door, eager to play the gracious host one last time. Let me walk you out, Brad said. And thank you, Nikolai, really. You saved my life. Volkov stopped and looked at him with cold, dead eyes. I did not save your life, Bradley. I just bought it. Remember that. They turned toward the foyer. Now, I said. I pressed the key. The reaction was instantaneous. The smart home system, which I had rewired and recoded over the last 3 days, seized control of the house. It started with a sound that I can only describe as the groan of a dying beast. The heavy automated security shutters, which were recessed into the window frames and usually only used for severe storms, slammed down simultaneously. Wham! 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 The noise was deafening. It sounded like a prison block going into lockdown. The view of the night sky outside the windows vanished, replaced by sheets of reinforced steel. Brad jumped back, dropping his wine glass. It shattered on the floor, spraying red liquid over his shoes. What was that? He screamed, spinning around. What is happening? Volkov's bodyguards instantly drew their weapons. They scanned the room looking for attackers, but there was nobody there. Just the walls closing in. Brad ran to the front door. He grabbed the handle and pulled. It did not budge. The magnetic locks I had installed, industrial-grade magnets capable of holding 2,000 pounds of force, had engaged. Open the door, Volkov roared, reaching for his own gun. Open it now. I cannot. Brad yelled, panic rising in his voice. It is stuck. The system. It is malfunctioning. It must be a glitch. I watched them scramble like rats in a bucket. Brad was pounding on the heavy oak door. Volkov was looking at the steel shutters, calculating if a bullet could penetrate them. The lawyer was cowering behind the sofa, clutching his briefcase to his chest. It is not a glitch, Bradley, I said to myself. It is a feature. Then I entered the second command. Blackout. The lights in the living room, the hallway, the kitchen, and the foyer cut out all at once. The house was plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The sudden absence of light was disorienting. I could hear them shouting over the audio feed. "Stay where you are," Volkov shouted. "Do not move." "Who is there?" Brad screamed. "Is someone there?" I waited 5 seconds. I wanted the darkness to settle. I wanted the fear to marinate. I wanted them to feel the weight of the house pressing down on them. Then I leaned into my microphone. I had routed my voice through the house's integrated surround sound system. I had boosted the bass and added a slight reverb, making it sound deep, omnipresent, and terrifying. "Hello, Bradley?" My voice boomed through the living room, echoing off the walls. It did not sound like the frail old man they thought they knew. It sounded like Judgment Day. Brad shrieked. It was a high-pitched sound of pure terror. "Who said that? Who is that? You know who it is," my voice thundered, filling the room. "You tried to erase me, son. You tried to drug me. You tried to bury me. But you forgot that I built this house. I am in the walls. I am in the floorboards. And right now, I am in your head." The beams of flashlights cut through the darkness. The bodyguards were sweeping their lights around, frantically trying to find the source of the voice. But the sound was coming from everywhere. "It is the old man," Volkov shouted, his voice tight with confusion. "I thought you said he was gone. I thought you said he was a vegetable." "He is..." Brad stammered, his voice shaking. "He is in a nursing home. I dropped him off myself. This is impossible. It is a recording. It has to be a recording." "Is it?" I asked. I typed a new command. The lights in the living room flared back on, but only at 10% brightness. It cast the room in a ghostly, dim glow full of long shadows. "Look at the TV, Bradley," my voice commanded. The massive 80-inch screen above the fireplace flickered to life. But it was not playing a movie. It was playing a video file labeled evidence_001.mp4. It was the footage from the teddy bear camera. The scene showed the living room from 3 nights ago. It showed Brad sitting on the sofa waiting. It showed the man in the dark coat entering. It showed the forgery equipment. Brad's face went white. He stopped breathing. He stared at the screen as his own crimes were played back to him in high definition. "What is this?" Volkov growled, stepping closer to Brad. "What are you showing us?" "Keep watching," my voice said. The video cut to the kitchen. It was the footage of Brad crushing the blue pills into the coffee powder. It zoomed in on his hands. It zoomed in on the bottle labeled haloperidol. Then it cut to the dinner table. It showed him handing the poisoned cup to me. It showed him smiling as he watched me drink it. The room went silent. Even the bodyguards stopped moving. They were criminals, yes. They were murderers and thieves. But even they had a code. And poisoning your own family, especially the elderly, was a kind of cowardice that even the mob looked down upon. "You poisoned him," Volkov whispered. He turned to look at Brad with a mixture of disgust and fury. "You brought me into a house where you were committing murder." Brad backed away, holding his hands up. No, Nikolai. It is not what it looks like. It was just medicine. He is sick. I was helping him." "Liar." My voice boomed from the speakers. "You were killing me to get the house. And you dragged Mr. Volkov here to be your accomplice." Volkov's face twisted into a snarl. He realized instantly what this meant. This was not just a loan transaction. This was a setup. By being here, by signing those papers, he was now tied to an attempted murder investigation. "You idiot," Volkov roared. He raised his gun, pointing it directly at Brad's chest. "You set us up. You brought the heat on us." "No," Brad screamed, falling to his knees. "I swear I did not know. He is watching us. He is watching us right now. Dad, please stop this. Tell them it is a misunderstanding." I watched him beg. The arrogant man who had pushed me down the stairs, the man who had laughed as he signed my wife into a home, was now on his knees, crying like a child. "It is too late for begging Bradley," I said, my voice cold and hard. "You wanted the house. You have the house. You are locked inside it. And you are not alone." I triggered the final phase of the payload. On the TV screen, the video changed. It showed a live feed from the exterior security cameras. Blue and red lights were flashing in the distance, dozens of them. They were silent at first, but then the sound of sirens began to bleed through the walls, getting louder and louder. The FBI, Volkov shouted. He spun around, looking for an exit. "Break the shutters. Get us out of here." His bodyguards opened fire on the steel shutters. Bang, bang, bang. The gunshots were deafening in the enclosed space, but the bullets just ricocheted off the reinforced steel, sparking wildly. I had designed those shutters to withstand hurricane-force debris. A 9mm bullet was not going to scratch them. "We are trapped," one of the bodyguards yelled, panic in his eyes. Volkov turned back to Brad. He grabbed Brad by the lapels of his expensive suit and lifted him off the ground. "You did this!" he screamed, spitting in Brad's face. "You dead man, you rat!" Brad was sobbing now, his legs dangling uselessly. "Nikolai, please. I have the money. I have the 2 million. You have nothing," Volkov shouted. He threw Brad across the room. Brad crashed into the coffee table, smashing it to pieces. He lay there amidst the splintered wood and the muddy boot prints curled into a ball covering his head. I watched the chaos unfold with a grim satisfaction. The room was a pressure cooker of fear and violence. The mobsters were trapped like rats. The con man was broken. And outside, the forces of justice were stacking up at the door. "Agent Miller," I said into the phone, "the suspects are armed and agitated. They are attempting to breach the rear shutters." "You have a green light." "Copy that," Vance. Agent Miller replied. "Breaching in 3, 2, 1. On the screen, I saw the front door explode inward. A battering ram smashed the lock mechanism that I had disengaged remotely just a second before impact. Flashbang grenades rolled into the room. Bang. Flash. Bright, blinding white light filled the screen, washing out the camera feed for a second. When the image returned, the room was filled with smoke and armored SWAT agents. "FBI, get down, get down." I saw Volkov drop his gun and raise his hands. I saw the lawyer faint. And I saw Brad lying in the wreckage of my living room, staring up at the ceiling, his eyes empty and wide. It was over. The ghost had revealed himself, and the haunting was complete. I leaned back in my chair at the resort and finally took a sip of my tea. It was cold, but it tasted like victory. The sound of a siren is usually a sound of panic, a signal that something has gone terribly wrong. But as I sat in the safety of the resort cabin watching my monitors, the rising wail of 20 police cruisers converging on my home sounded like a symphony. It was a precise orchestration of justice that I had timed down to the millisecond. On the screen, I saw the exterior floodlights from the arriving SWAT vans cut through the darkness, painting the front of my house in blinding white illumination. Inside the living room, the mood shifted from confusion to sheer animalistic terror. Volkov was no longer the arrogant mob boss puffing on a cigar. He was a trapped rat frantically looking for a hole in the steel cage I had dropped around him. He fired another shot at the window shutters, but the bullet just flattened against the reinforced alloy with a useless spark. I watched Brad. He had crawled into the fetal position under the wreckage of the coffee table, covering his ears, as if he could block out the reality of what was happening. He was shaking so violently that I could see his expensive suit rippling. He was muttering to himself a continuous stream of denial. "This isn't real. This isn't real. He's senile. He's supposed to be senile." But it was real. I picked up my radio handset to speak to the lead tactical officer on the ground. "This is Vance," I said, my voice steady. "The front door magnetic locks are disengaged. The target suspects are armed and considered extremely dangerous. You have the green light to breach." "Copy that, Mr. Vance," the officer replied. "Breaching in 3, 2, 1. On the monitor, the front door of my house exploded inward. I had unlocked it remotely, but the SWAT team took no chances. They used a battering ram that turned the heavy oak frame into splinters. It was a violent intrusion, but it was necessary to scrub the rot from my home. Flashbang grenades rolled across the foyer floor and bounced into the living room. Bang! A wall of white light and a deafening concussive boom filled the room. Even through the camera feed, the intensity was overwhelming. The video glitched for a second, turning into static before stabilizing. When the image returned, the room was filled with thick gray smoke. "FBI, get down on the ground." The shout was a collective roar from a dozen armored throats. Men in black tactical gear poured into the room like a flood, moving with lethal efficiency. Laser sights cut through the smoke, dancing across the walls and the terrified faces of the men inside. Volkov hesitated. For a split second, I saw his hand tighten on his weapon. He was calculating the odds. He was wondering if he could take out a few agents before he went down. But then 3 red laser dots appeared on his chest. He realized it was suicide. With a snarl of pure hatred, he dropped his gun and raised his heavy hands. "On your knees, now!" An agent kicked Volkov's legs out from under him, sending the giant Russian crashing to the floor. He was zipped tied in seconds, his face pressed into the expensive rug he had muddied just minutes before. But Brad was a different story. He did not get on the ground. He stood up, his hands waving frantically in the air, his eyes wide and manic. "Don't shoot," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I am the victim here. Help me. He is crazy. The old man is crazy." An agent grabbed Brad by the shoulder and spun him around, forcing him against the wall. "Get down on the ground, sir." "No, listen to me," Brad shrieked, struggling against the agent's grip. "You don't understand. My father-in-law rigged the house. He trapped us. He is watching us right now. He is a psycho. He tried to kill us." I watched from my chair, sipping my tea, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Look at him, I thought. Even at the end, even with the barrel of a federal rifle in his face, he is still trying to spin the narrative. He is still trying to gaslight the world. The agent did not listen. He swept Brad's legs and slammed him onto the floor. Brad hit the ground hard, his cheeks squashed against the hardwood. He began to sob, ugly, loud sobbing. "It is not my fault," he wailed. "They made me do it. The Russians made me do it. I just wanted to save the house." Liar Volkov roared from the other side of the room, struggling against his restraints. "You came to me. You begged me for the money. You rat. Shut up, both of you," the lead agent commanded. The room was secured. The smoke began to clear. I saw agents photographing the table. They took pictures of the cash. They took pictures of the signed fraudulent loan agreement. They took pictures of the Mont Blanc pen lying on the floor, the ink still wet on the crime. Then the front door opened again. Walking through the debris was not a SWAT agent. It was a man in a tan uniform with a Stetson hat. Sheriff Jim Patterson, my oldest friend. We had fished together for 40 years. He knew about the dementia ruse, he knew about the abuse, and he had asked specifically to be the one to put the cuffs on Bradley Miller. Jim walked into the living room, stepping over the broken furniture. He looked around, shaking his head. He looked at the camera lens above the fireplace and gave a subtle nod. He knew I was watching. He walked over to where Brad was lying on the floor. "Stand him up," Jim said to the agents. The agents hauled Brad to his feet. Brad looked at the sheriff, and his eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. "Sheriff Patterson." Brad gasped. "Thank God. You know me. You know who I am. Tell them. Tell them this is a mistake. Elijah has lost his mind. He trapped us here." Jim Patterson looked at Brad with a gaze that could peel paint off a wall. He took a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. "I know exactly who you are, son," Jim said, his voice low and gravelly. "You are the man who pushed my best friend down a flight of stairs. You are the man who poisoned his wife. And you are the man who just tried to sell a house that doesn't belong to him to a terrorist organization." Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But he is senile," Brad stammered. "He doesn't know what he is doing. He thinks I am his dog." Jim laughed. It was a harsh sound. "He played you, Brad. He played you like a fiddle. That old man you tried to throw in the trash has an IQ of 140. He recorded everything. The pills, the forgery, the fall. We have it all." Brad went still. The reality finally hit him. The weight of it crushed him. His knees buckled and the agents had to hold him up. Jim spun Brad around and slapped the cuffs on his wrists. He tightened them hard. "Bradley Miller, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, bank fraud, and racketeering." Jim recited the charges with relish. "You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you start using it because every time you open your mouth, you just dig the hole deeper." Brad looked at the camera one last time. His face was a mask of despair. He whispered something. I turned up the volume to hear it. "Dad, I am sorry." I leaned into my microphone. "I am not your dad, Bradley." My voice boomed through the house for the last time. "And you are not sorry. You are just caught." Jim pulled Brad toward the door. The walk of shame began. I watched as they dragged him out of the house he had tried to steal. He stumbled over the threshold, his Italian shoes scuffing on the broken doorframe. He was weeping openly now, a broken man with no dignity left. Outside, the flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the neighborhood. Neighbors were standing on their porches in their bathrobes, watching the spectacle. George Henderson, my observant neighbor, was there, pointing and nodding. He knew. I watched them load Brad into the back of a squad car. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The man who had terrorized my family, who had brought evil into my sanctuary, was now just a number in the system. Volkov was brought out next. He did not cry. He glared at the camera with pure malice. But I was not afraid of him anymore. He was going to a federal supermax prison where his threats would bounce off concrete walls. The agents began to bag the evidence. They took the laptop, they took the documents. They took the blue pills from the trash can where I had thrown the fake ones earlier. The house was a mess. The door was broken, the furniture was smashed, and the air still smelled of cordite and fear. But to me it looked beautiful. It was clean. The infection had been cut out. I sat back in my chair at the resort and closed my eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep exhaustion. My hip ached. My hands trembled slightly. I was an old man after all, but I was an old man who had won. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I looked up. Beatrice was standing there wrapped in her blanket. She looked at the screen, at the flashing lights and the police cars. "Is it over, Eli?" she asked softly. I reached up and covered her hand with mine. "Yes, Bea," I said. "The ghosts are gone. We can go home now." I looked at the screen one last time. The squad car carrying Brad pulled away, disappearing into the night. "Goodbye, son," I whispered. "Don't drop the soap." I closed the laptop. The screen went black. The show was over. Now came the hard part. The rebuilding. But I was an engineer. Rebuilding was what I did best. The sound of a heavy steel door slamming shut is a sound that stays with you. It is a final sound. A sound that says there is no going back. 2 days after the raid on my house, I walked through a series of those doors at the King County Detention Center. The air inside smelled of industrial bleach and stale sweat, a cold chemical scent that burned the nostrils. I was dressed in my best Sunday suit, my shoes polished to a mirror shine, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the linoleum floor. I was not there to gloat. Gloating is for small men. I was there to deliver the final bill of sale. I sat down on the metal stool in the visitation booth. The glass partition between me and the prisoner's side was thick-scratched and smeared with the grease of 1,000 desperate foreheads. I placed my hands on the counter and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The guards were taking their time. They knew who I was. They knew what my son-in-law had done. In prison, crimes against the elderly and the weak do not earn you any respect, not even from the corrections officers. Finally, the door on the other side buzzed open. 2 guards dragged a man into the room and shoved him into the chair. I barely recognized him. Bradley Miller, the man who spent $1,000 a month on skincare and hair products, looked like he had aged 20 years in 48 hours. His head was shaved, a standard procedure for lice prevention that stripped him of his vanity instantly. He was wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His face was a map of misery. His lip was split and swollen. His left eye was bruised shut, a souvenir from his first night in general population, or perhaps a parting gift from Volkov in the holding cell. He looked up and saw me. For a moment, his good eye widened with a flicker of hope. He grabbed the phone receiver with trembling hands. "Dad! Oh, God! Dad, you came!" I picked up the receiver slowly. The plastic felt cold against my ear. "Hello, Bradley," I said, my voice calm and level. "You look terrible." "Dad, you have to get me out of here!" Brad rushed the words tumbling out of his mouth in a panic. "It is a nightmare in here. They put me in a cell near Volkov. He screams at me all night. He says he is going to kill me. You have to drop the charges. Please, tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I was just trying to manage your finances because you were sick." He was still doing it. Even here in a cage, he was trying to manipulate reality. He was trying to spin the narrative that I was the broken one and he was the savior. "I am not dropping anything, Bradley," I said. "In fact, I just came from a meeting with the district attorney. I gave them the full unedited video files from the house. I gave them the audio recordings of you mocking me to your friends. And I gave them the chemical analysis of the pills you were feeding Beatrice. There is no misunderstanding. You are going away for a long time." Brad's face crumpled. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the glass. Tears leaked from his swollen eye. "I did it for us, Dad," he sobbed. "I did it for Naya. We were drowning in debt. I just wanted to save the family. I love her. I love Naya more than anything. Please think about your daughter. Do you want her husband to rot in prison? Do you want her to be alone?" I stared at him. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment to strip away his last defense. The lie that he was a loving husband who made a mistake. I reached into my inside pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I held it up to the glass. It was a printout of his chat logs. Not the ones from his work computer, but the ones from a secret burner phone I had found taped under his desk drawer during my search. Brad stopped crying. He stared at the paper. "Who is Jessica?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a blade sliding across concrete. Brad went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Jessica is 22 years old," I continued. "She is a hostess at that club you go to downtown. According to these messages, you promised her that you would be leaving your wife soon. You told her that you were just waiting for the old man to kick the bucket so you could cash out the inheritance." Brad shook his head feebly. "No, that is just talk. It didn't mean anything. And then there is this," I said, holding up another page. "This is a search history from your private browser dated 3 weeks ago. Do you want to know what you searched for, Bradley?" He did not answer. He looked like he wanted to vomit. "You searched for life insurance payout clauses for accidental death of spouse, and then you searched for undetected poisons for healthy adults." I watched the realization hit him. He knew that I knew. He knew that Nia was not his reason for living. She was his next target. Once he had secured the house, once he had put me and Beatrice in the ground, Nia would have been the only thing standing between him and total freedom. He would have killed her just as easily as he tried to kill me. "You are a monster," I said. "You didn't do this for Nia. You were going to murder my daughter." "No," Brad screamed, slamming his fist against the glass. "No, I wouldn't. I never would. You are a liar and a coward," I said, cutting him off. "And Nia knows. I showed her everything this morning. She is filing for divorce, Bradley. She is changing her name back to Vance, and she never wants to see your face again." Brad slumped back in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a toy and realized he couldn't fix it. "So that is it," he whispered. "I lose everything. I go to jail for 20 years. I leaned closer to the glass. A small, cold smile touched my lips. "Oh, Bradley. If only it were that simple. You see, going to prison is actually the least of your problems." He looked up confused. "What do you mean?" "Let us talk about the money," I said. "The $2 million you borrowed from Volkov." Brad flinched at the name. "You signed the loan agreement," I explained. "The wire transfer was initiated. The money hit your offshore account. Legally and technically the transaction was completed. You borrowed the money." "So what?" Brad said. "The FBI froze the account. I don't have the money. It is gone." "Exactly," I said. "The FBI seized the funds as proceeds of a crime. The money is in a federal evidence locker, and eventually it will be confiscated by the government. You do not have it." I paused, letting the silence stretch out. "But here's the thing about the Russian mob, Bradley. They do not care about FBI seizures. They do not care about asset forfeiture. In their eyes, you signed for the money. You received the money. Therefore, you owe the money." Brad's eyes widened. A look of pure primal terror began to dawn on his face. "Volkov thinks you stole it," I said softly. "I saw the police report. Volkov believes you set him up to get arrested so you could keep the $2 million for yourself. He thinks you are sitting on his cash planning to spend it when you get out." "No," Brad gasped. "No, that is crazy. The FBI has it. He has to know the FBI has it." "Volkov doesn't trust the FBI," I said. "He trusts his own ledger. And in his ledger you are $2 million in the red. And since you are both in the same prison system..." I glanced at the guards who were standing by the door watching us with bored expressions. "I heard Volkov has a lot of friends in here," I continued. "The Aryan Brotherhood does a lot of business with the Russians. For a few packs of cigarettes they will do whatever Volkov asks. And right now Volkov wants his pound of flesh." Brad began to shake. Not the nervous trembling from before, but a violent full-body convulsion. He looked around the room as if the shadows were already reaching for him. "You have to help me," he begged, his voice high and shrill. "You have to tell them. Tell Volkov I don't have the money. Please, Elijah, I will do anything. I will confess to everything. Just get me into protective custody." I stood up. I buttoned my suit jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Bradley. You see, I am just a senile old man. Who would listen to me?" I turned to walk away. Dad, please don't leave me here," Brad screamed. He threw himself against the glass, clawing at it with his fingernails. "They are going to kill me. They are going to cut me apart." I stopped at the door. I looked back at him one last time. "You pushed me down the stairs," I said. "You watched me fall. And you didn't call an ambulance. You just worried about the rug." I tapped my cane on the floor. You made your bed, son. Now you have to die in it. I signaled the guard. The door buzzed open. No, no, no. Brad's screams followed me down the hallway, echoing off the concrete walls. He sounded like an animal caught in a trap of his own making. I walked out into the sunlight. The air outside tasted sweet and clean. It smelled of rain and pine trees and freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. My car was waiting. Nia was in the driver's seat. She looked pale and sad, but her eyes were clear. The fog of manipulation had lifted. "Is it done?" she asked as I got in. "It is done," I said, buckling my seatbelt. Did he say anything?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "He said he was sorry I lied. It was a small kindness, the only one I would ever grant him. But he knows what he did, and he knows he is never coming home." Nia nodded, wiping a single tear from her cheek. She put the car in drive. "Where to?" "Dad," she asked. "Home," I said. "Let us go home." As we drove away, I looked back at the gray fortress of the detention center. I thought about Brad sitting in his cell waiting for night to fall, waiting for the sound of heavy footsteps approaching his bunk. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I was an engineer. I had identified a structural failure. I had isolated it, and I had removed it before the whole building collapsed. Justice, I realized, is not always about the law. Sometimes justice is just simple arithmetic. You subtract the villain and the equation finally balances. The drive home from the detention center was the longest journey of my life, even though it was only 10 miles. Nia drove with a mechanical stiffness, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to look at the rearview mirror where the ghost of her marriage was fading into the distance. We arrived at the house, which was still taped off with yellow police tape, a crime scene that was also our sanctuary. We walked inside, past the splintered doorframe, past the ruined coffee table, and into the kitchen. The silence was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of a library, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a battlefield after the guns have stopped firing. Nia sat down at the kitchen table. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped on concrete. Her skin was gray. Her eyes were hollow. She stared at her hands, the same hands that had unknowingly administered poison to her mother for weeks. "I need to know everything, Dad," she whispered. Her voice was brittle. "I need to see what you gave the police." I hesitated. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to burn the laptop and bury the truth so she could keep some shred of her happy memories. But I knew that a foundation built on secrets would eventually crack. She needed the truth no matter how much it hurt. I placed the laptop on the table and opened the file named Evidence. I watched her face as she clicked on the videos. She watched Brad mixing the powder. She watched him laughing with Volkov. She watched him mocking her behind her back, calling her weak and gullible. She read the text messages to the mistress. She saw the search history about life insurance payouts. When she reached the video of the night I fell down the stairs, the video where Brad kicked the rug over the oil instead of helping me, she made a sound that I will never forget. It was a low, guttural keen of pure animalistic pain. She slammed the laptop shut and buried her face in her arms. "Oh my God," she sobbed. Her body shook so violently the table rattled. "I killed you. I almost killed you. He used me, Dad. He used me to hurt you. I handed Mom the pills. I signed the papers. I am just as guilty as he is." She stood up, knocking her chair over. She began to pace the kitchen, pulling at her hair. "How could I be so stupid?" she screamed. "How could I not see it? He was lying to me every day. He was sleeping in my bed and planning my murder. And I loved him. I defended him. I turned against you for him." She grabbed a ceramic vase from the counter and threw it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I hate him," she shrieked. "But I hate myself more. I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry." She collapsed onto the floor amidst the shards of pottery curling into a ball. She looked small and broken, a little girl lost in a nightmare she had helped create. I did not speak. I did not offer platitudes. I walked over to where she lay and sat down on the cold tiles beside her. I ignored the pain in my bad hip. I gathered her into my arms just as I had done when she was a child and scraped her knee. I rocked her back and forth, letting her wail into my chest, soaking my shirt with her tears. We sat there for a long time. The sun went down, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. "Listen to me, Nia," I said softly when her sobbing had turned to quiet hiccups. "Look at me." She raised her head. Her face was swollen and blotchy. Her eyes were full of shame. You are not stupid, I said, wiping a tear from her cheek with my thumb. You are loving, and there is a difference. Brad is a predator. Predators are successful because they know how to mimic prey. They know how to sound like us and look like us. He spent years studying you, learning your weak spots, learning exactly what you needed to hear. But I should have known, she whispered. I should have protected you. You were protecting us, I said firmly. In your mind, you were saving us from a nursing home. You were making the hard choice because you thought it was the right choice. He weaponized your empathy, Naya. That is his crime, not yours. I took a deep breath. I am an engineer, Naya. When a bridge collapses, we do not blame the steel for carrying the weight. We blame the architect who designed it to fail. Brad was the architect of this disaster. You were just the material he tried to break. But you didn't break, honey. You are still here. We are still here. But I hurt you, she said, touching the bruise on my arm. I am a Marine, I chuckled dryly. I have had worse scrapes than this. And your mother is tough. She is already asking for her garden shears. Nia let out a weak, watery laugh. I squeezed her shoulder. The only thing you need to apologize for is that vase. Your mother liked that vase. We sat there on the floor for a while longer, surrounded by the wreckage of her marriage. But in that wreckage, I saw the first green shoots of recovery. She was not defending him anymore. She was not making excuses. The blindfold had been ripped off, and for the first time in years, she was seeing the world clearly. The next few weeks were a blur of legal battles and administrative warfare. But this time, I was not fighting alone. Nia was right beside me. We went to the lawyer office on a Tuesday morning. Robert Vance, the attorney who had helped me set up the trust, greeted us with a somber smile. He had the divorce papers ready. It was a thick stack of documents. The dissolution of marriage, the restraining order, the petition to annul the prenuptial agreement based on fraud. Nia sat in the leather chair, her back straight, her hands folded on the desk. She looked different. She had cut her hair short, a sharp bob that framed her face and made her look fiercer. She had stopped wearing the pastel colors Brad liked and was wearing a dark blazer. She picked up the pen. It was not my Mont Blanc. It was a cheap plastic pen from the receptionist's desk. But in her hand it looked like a sword. She read every page. She asked questions. What about his debts? She asked Robert. Will the creditors come after my savings? Robert shook his head. Because we have proven criminal fraud, and because Elijah moved the assets into the trust before the loans were finalized, your personal assets are shielded. Brad is solely liable for his debts to the Russians and the banks. You are walking away clean, Nia. Clean, Nia repeated. She looked at the signature line. She signed her name. Nia. Vance. She stared at the signature for a long time. I kept his last name for 5 years, she whispered. Miller. It felt like I was wearing a costume. Vance feels like skin. She handed the papers back to Robert. File them, she said, and send a copy to the prison. I want him to know that he doesn't own any part of me anymore, not even my name. After the meeting, we went to the bank. It was time for the final lesson. We sat in the private meeting room with the branch manager. I had the ledger of the Vance Family Trust open on the table. It showed the properties, the bonds, the savings I had accumulated over 50 years. It was a substantial amount, enough to tempt 100 Brads. I slid the ledger over to Nia. This is what we have, I said, and from today, you are the co-trustee. Nia looked at the numbers. Her eyes widened. Dad? I didn't know. I kept it quiet, I said, because money is like blood. It keeps you alive, but if you show it to the world, you attract sharks. I pulled out a notebook. It was my engineering logbook where I tracked maintenance schedules and load calculations. But the last 20 pages were filled with financial notes. I am going to teach you how to manage this, Nia, I said. I am going to teach you how to spot a bad investment, how to read a contract until your eyes bleed, how to interview a property manager, and most importantly, how to say no. Nia ran her hand over the leather cover of the book. I am afraid, Dad, she admitted. What if I mess it up? What if I am not smart enough? I looked at my daughter. The woman who had survived the betrayal of the person she loved most and come out the other side not bitter but determined. You have Vance blood in you, I said. We are builders. We are fixers. You won't mess it up because you are going to treat this money the same way I treat a suspension bridge. You are going to test it. You are going to inspect it. And you are never going to take it for granted. We spent the rest of the afternoon going over the accounts. I watched her. She was asking sharp questions. She was noticing discrepancies in the bank fees. She was suggesting safer diversified bonds. She was not the naive girl who had handed me a poisoned cup. She was a woman building her own armor. As we walked out of the bank, the sun was setting over the Seattle skyline. The air was crisp and cold. Nia stopped on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. She looked at her reflection in the glass window of the bank. She adjusted her blazer. "I am going to be okay." "Aren't I, Dad?" she asked. I put my arm around her shoulders. "You are going to be more than okay," I said. "You are going to be formidable." We walked to the car together. My hip still ached and I leaned on my cane, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The ghost was gone. The house was safe. And my daughter had finally come home. I looked at her profile as she drove. She had a set to her jaw that reminded me of my father, a hardness that hadn't been there before. It was the hardness of scar tissue, tough and resilient. Brad had tried to break us. He had tried to steal our legacy. But all he had done was strip away the paint and reveal the steel beneath. "Drive fast, kid," I said, smiling. "Mom is waiting for dinner." Nia smiled back, a real genuine smile that reached her eyes. On it, Dad. And as the car merged into traffic, I knew that the Vance legacy was in good hands. We had survived the storm, and now it was time to enjoy the calm. Spring in Seattle is a promise that the rain eventually keeps. It has been 6 months since the flashing lights and the SWAT teams descended on my driveway, and the gray clouds have finally parted to reveal a pale blue sky. The house is quiet now, but it is a good quiet. It is not the silence of secrets and poisons, but the peaceful silence of a structure that has weathered a hurricane and is settling back onto its foundation. I spent the morning in the garden with Beatrice. We replaced the flower beds that the police had trampled during the raid. The front door has been replaced with a solid mahogany slab reinforced with a steel core just in case. The living room floor, where Brad signed his life away, has been sanded and refinished, erasing the scuff marks of his desperate struggle. Beatrice is kneeling in the dirt planting tulips. She looks up at me, wiping a smudge of soil from her cheek, and smiles. "Eli," she asks, "did I take my vitamins this morning?" I smile back. "Yes, B. You took them with your tea." She nods, satisfied, and goes back to digging. She forgets things sometimes. She forgets where she put her reading glasses or the name of the actor in the movie we are watching. But it is a gentle forgetting. It is the natural erosion of time, not the chemical demolition of a poisoner. Her eyes are clear. Her hands are steady. She is mine, again returned to me from the brink of the abyss. I watch her and I feel a lump in my throat. We are old. We are slower than we used to be. But we are here. We are breathing the fresh air and feeling the sun on our faces. That is a luxury Brad will not have for a very long time. The last letter from the Department of Corrections said he had been transferred to a high-security facility in Oregon to separate him from Volkov's reach, but I know that walls cannot protect a man from his own ghosts. I walk up to the porch and sit on the swing. My hip still aches when it rains, a permanent reminder of the fall, but I welcome the pain. It keeps me sharp. It reminds me that survival has a cost. I hear the snip, snip, snip of garden shears from next door. I look over the fence. George Henderson is there trimming his hedges. He is 82 years old, wearing a cardigan that has seen better days. He sees me watching him. He stops clipping. He does not wave. He does not smile. He just looks at me with those watery, sharp eyes. I lift my bottle of lemonade in a silent toast. George nods. Just a single sharp dip of his chin. Then he goes back to his hedges. That nod says everything. It says, "I saw the wolf at your door." It says, "I did not look away." It says, "We are the old guard, the watchmen on the wall, and we look out for our own." George will never ask for a thank you, and I will never embarrass him by offering one. But next winter, when the snow comes, I will be over there with my snowblower clearing his driveway before he even wakes up. That is the code. That is how we survive. I lean back and close my eyes, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barking. A lawnmower in the distance. The sound of Nia's car pulling into the driveway. She steps out of the car carrying a briefcase. She looks different now. The soft edges are gone, replaced by a professional poise. She walks with a purpose. She is managing the trust now, handling the investments and the properties. She made a 10% return last quarter. She is learning that money is a tool, not a magic wand. She waves at me. "Hi, Dad." "I brought steaks for dinner." I wave back. I look at her and I see the future. Brad thought he could break her. He thought she was weak because she was kind. He did not understand that kindness is not a lack of spine. It is a choice. And when you strip that choice away, you find out exactly what kind of steel is underneath. I sit there and I think about the world today. It moves so fast. Everyone wants the shortcut. They want the cryptocurrency that triples overnight. They want the inheritance without the work. They want the respect without the sacrifice. Brad was a product of that world. He looked at this house and saw a pile of cash. He did not see the 40 years of mortgage payments. He did not see the weekends spent fixing the roof. He did not see the life lived within these walls. He thought he could hack the system. He thought he could bypass the firewall of family loyalty. But he forgot that some systems are hardwired. I am an engineer. I know that anything built without a solid foundation will eventually crack. You can paint over the cracks. You can put up fancy wallpaper. But gravity always wins in the end. We built this family on truth and hard work. Brad built his life on lies and leverage. It was only a matter of time before he collapsed. I take a sip of lemonade. The sun is dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. The house behind me feels warm and safe. The ghost is gone. The shadows have retreated. I am Elijah Vance. I am 73 years old. I have walked through the fire and I have dragged my family out with me. I am tired. My bones hurt, but my conscience is clean. And as I watch the first stars appear in the twilight, I realize that this is what victory looks like. It is not a parade. It is not a trophy. It is just a quiet evening on the porch with the people you love safe inside. Never mistake a quiet demeanor for a lack of awareness. My son-in-law saw my gray hair as a sign of weakness, assuming my legacy was ripe for the picking. He forgot that the generation which built the foundation knows exactly where the structural weaknesses are and how to bring the whole house down on an intruder. Trust is precious, but verification is survival. Family isn't just about who sits at your table. It is about who would poison your cup when you look away. In the end, dignity isn't given. It is defended sometimes with silence, sometimes with a trap. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to protect your family from a wolf in sheep's clothing. I read every single comment. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your doors locked.